Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. The first thing I noticed was the pumpkin. It was a small thing, really, a detail so minute that to mention it felt foolish. But it was there. I had carved it myself just that afternoon, a traditional jagged-toothed grin, the triangle eyes squinting with malevolent cheer. I had placed it on the porch railing, its candle a tiny, flickering heart. Now, as I stood at the screen door, the October chill seeping through the thin wood, I saw that the pumpkin had turned. Not much, just a fraction of an inch clockwise. The leering face, which had been aimed squarely at the empty street, now seemed to gaze with a sly, knowing tilt toward our front door. I told myself the wind had done it. A gust from the bay I hadn't felt. But the night was perfectly, preternaturally still. The only movement was the slow, syrupy crawl of candlelight shadows dancing across its orange skin. That was 3 days before Halloween. The town of Harvest End was a place that lived for October. Nestled in a crook of the coastline where the water was as gray as the sky, its entire identity was wrapped in the rust-colored leaves of its ancient oaks and the crisp, cinnamon-scented air of the fall. Every porch was a gallery of jack-o'-lanterns, their grins ranging from the silly to the sinister. Synthetic cobwebs, dusted with a deliberate hand, clung to every shrub and porch swing. Plastic skeletons hung from gables, and in the twilight, with the fog rolling in from the sea, it was sometimes difficult to tell which bones were vinyl and which might have once been real. This was a town that understood the liminal space Halloween occupied, the thinness of the veil, and instead of fearing it, we made it our carnival. We baked the fear into pies and hung it from our eaves with cheerful pride. My name is Kimberly. I lived in a small clapboard house on Hemlock Lane with my boyfriend, Hamilton. He was a solid man, a carpenter with hands that could gentle a frightened dog or build a bookshelf that would last a century. He saw the world in straight lines and right angles. He laughed when I mentioned the pumpkin, pulling me into the warmth of his flannel shirt. It's Harvest End, Kim. The whole town is tilted. It's part of the charm. His breath was a small, warm cloud in the cold living room. I wanted to believe him. I tried to, but the next day, the tilt became more pronounced. I was walking through the town square, past the old gazebo strung with orange and black lights, when I saw the weather vane on the post office roof. It was an old wrought iron rooster, a town landmark. It had always pointed north, stubborn as the rocks along the shore. Now it was stuck, pointing northeast. And as I watched, squinting against the low, orange glare of the harvest moon that already hung, too large, in the afternoon sky, I saw it twitch. Just a shudder, a metallic stutter. Then it moved again, another few degrees, with a grinding shriek that set my teeth on edge. A spiral. It was tracing a slow, deliberate spiral. I wasn't the only one who saw it. A few other people had stopped. Old man Henderson, who ran the antique shop, peered up from under the brim of his flat cap, his mouth a grim line. He caught my eye, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something ancient and cold in his gaze. Then he looked away, shuffling off into the gloom of his shop, a place full of dusty things that had outlived their owners. That night, Hamilton found me staring out the kitchen window, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I had no intention of drinking. The backyard was a mess of shadows, the skeletal branches of the oak tree clawing at the sky. "It's the wind, Kimmy," he said, his voice soft but firm. "It's always windy this time of year. It messes with things. It's not the wind," I whispered. "It's something else. It's like a tightening." He came and stood behind me, his hands on my shoulders, a solid, anchoring weight. "It's just Halloween. You know how this town gets. Everyone leans into the spookiness a little too hard. It gets in your head, but it wasn't tea in my head. It was in the world." The following day, the eve of Halloween Eve, the spiral began to claim the people. I saw Mrs. Davison, the librarian, arranging a display of horror novels in the window. Her movements were always precise, orderly. But now, as she placed the books, her hand was moving in a slow, continuous circle, stacking them not in neat piles, but in a swirling, ascending tower that defied gravity. Her eyes were distant, glazed like sugar-coated candy. She was humming, a low, monotonous drone that sounded like a far-off saw. Outside, the children were playing. Their costumes were ghosts and witches and superheroes, but their play had changed. Instead of running and shrieking with laughter, they were walking. In a long, silent line, they traced a vast, looping circle in the middle of the street, their small feet crunching through the drifts of crimson and gold leaves. They moved with a somber, ritualistic slowness, their masked faces turned inward toward the empty center of their circle. There was no joy in it. It was a procession, a practice. Hamilton saw it too that time. He stood beside me at the window, his usual calm finally cracking. "What the hell are they doing?" he muttered, his breath fogging the cold glass. "They were following the pattern," I said. My voice sounded flat, resigned. The dread was no longer a seed in my stomach. It was a vine, twisting around my ribs, squeezing my heart. We decided to get out, to drive to the next town over, to see something that wasn't touched by whatever was happening. But the road out of Harvest S End, the one that wound along the cliff face, was different. The yellow center line, which had always been a reassuring guide, was gone. In its place, a new line had been painted, a continuous, looping spiral that started wide at the town limits and coiled inward, tighter and tighter. It was a labyrinth with no exit. Hamilton slammed on the brakes. "This isn't funny," he said to the empty car, to the town, to the thing that was doing this. He put the car in reverse, but when he looked in the rearview mirror, the road behind us had changed, too. The spiral was there as well, coiling back the way we had come. We were trapped in the middle of an infinite, unspooling coil. We returned home in a silence that was heavier than any noise. The town was quieter now. The festive decorations seemed like grimacing trophies. The jack-o'-lanterns on every porch step no longer seemed to be lit by candles, but by a cold, phosphorescent glow from within, and their carved smiles were too wide, too knowing. They were watching us. They had always been watching us. Halloween morning dawned cold and gray, the sky the color of a week-old bruise. The air tasted of wood smoke and decay, the sweet rot of pumpkins left too long on the vine. The spiral was everywhere. It was in the frost on the windows, forming intricate, whorled patterns. It was in the way the crows circled the church steeple, a living vortex of black feathers and rasping cries. It was in the way the townspeople moved, their steps listless, their paths through the streets inevitably curving, always turning them back toward the center of town. The authorities, what few there were useless. We saw Sheriff Miller standing in the middle of the town square. He wasn't directing traffic or investigating. He was just spinning. Slowly, arms slightly outstretched, his face upturned to the gray sky, a beatific, empty smile on his lips. He was atop winding down, and when he finally fell, he would curl into a fetal position, a perfect, final spiral. Hamilton became a man possessed, not by the town-s madness, but by a desperate, protective fury. He boarded up the windows with plywood, not in straight lines, but in frantic, overlapping arcs, trying to fight the pattern with its own language. He dragged our heaviest furniture against the doors. "It's just for tonight," he kept saying, his voice a raw, frayed wire. "It's just until midnight. After Halloween, it will stop. It has to stop." But I knew it wouldn't. The spiral wasn't just happening on Halloween. Halloween was simply the door it was using to enter our world. The thinning of the veil wasn't just for ghosts and goblins. It was for older, hungrier things. Things that thought in geometries of madness. As dusk fell, the real horror began. The doorbell rang, not once, but in a continuous, chiming drone. Trick or treat. Hamilton peered through a crack in the plywood. His face, illuminated by the ghoulish glow of our own jack-o'-lantern, went slack with a terror I had never seen in him. "Don T, look, Kim," he whispered, his back against the door. Don T, answer it. But I had to. I moved to the window, found a sliver of space between the boards. The street was full of children, but they weren't children. They were too tall, too thin. Their costumes were not of plastic and fabric, but of shadow and suggestion. Their masks were not cartoonish, but smooth, featureless ovals, and they reflected the spiraling, phosphorescent light of the pumpkins in dizzying, nauseating patterns. They didn't hold out bags for candy. Their hands were empty, and they moved up the walk not in a run, but in that same slow, relentless procession, their bodies swaying in a rhythm that was both monotonous and ritualistic. A dark lullaby made flesh. They stopped at every door, but they didn't knock or ring. They simply stood, and the homeowners, their faces as blank as the children's masks, would open their doors and step out to join the procession. They were being harvested. Our door shuddered under a blow that was not a knock, but a deep, resonant thump, like a great, slow heartbeat. The wood splintered around the lock. Hamilton braced himself against it, his muscles corded. "Kim, get back," he yelled. The door exploded inward, not in a shower of splinters, but in a slow, beautiful, unfurling curl of wood and metal. And there, in the doorway, stood not a child, but a figure of impossible height, composed of the same swirling darkness as the things outside. It had no face, only a vortex where its head should be, a spinning, silent maelstrom that pulled at the very light in the room. Hamilton screamed, a sound of pure defiance, and charged it with a piece of the broken door, a makeshift spear. He was a straight line attacking a curve. The result was inevitable. The darkness simply wrapped around him. It didn't crush him or tear him apart. It absorbed him. I watched as his body, my strong, beautiful Hamilton, was slowly, gently twisted. His limbs curled. His spine arched backward into a perfect arc, and then continued to curve, folding in on himself, tighter and tighter, until he was a knot of flesh and bone and flannel, a human spiral that rolled once on the floor and then was still. The thing in the doorway did not move toward me. It simply waited. The hypnotic, swirling pattern of its head was the only thing in the world. The sound of the town was gone. The chiming doorbells, the rustling leaves, the distant screams, all of it was swallowed by the silent, spinning void. I felt no fear anymore. The vine of dread had blossomed into a strange, cold peace. This was the way of things. This was the pattern of Harvest S End. We had celebrated the spiral for so long in our decorations, in our corn mazes, in the very curl of a pumpkin S vine. And now it had come to collect its due. I took a step forward, then another. I didn't walk toward the door, but toward the heavy, gilt-framed mirror that hung in our hallway. I needed to see myself one last time before I was unmade. The glass was old, speckled with age, and the light from the dying candle in the pumpkin threw a wavering, orange glow across its surface. I saw the hallway behind me, the wreckage of the door, the still, coiled form that had been Hamilton. And I saw the dark, towering thing standing just behind my shoulder. Its vortex head spun, a silent command. I looked at my own reflection. My face was pale, my eyes wide. And then, imperceptibly at first, my reflection began to change. My head tilted clockwise. A slow, knowing smile stretched my lips, a smile I was not making. The pupils of my eyes began to swirl, melting from round dots into tiny, perfect spirals. I felt a corresponding pressure in my own skull, a gentle, internal twisting. I was not being consumed. I was being aligned. I was becoming the thing I beheld. The figure behind me lifted a hand of swirling shadow and placed it on my shoulder. The touch was cold, final. I looked into the mirror, into my own spiraling eyes, and I understood. There was no monster at the door. There was no curse from outside. The spiral was not an invasion. It was an awakening. It was the true face of this place, and now it was my face too. I am not observing the horror. I am the horror. I am the stillness at the center of the spin. I am the smile on the jack-o'-lantern. I am the twist in the road. I am the spiral. And I am waiting for you. The thought was not my own, yet it bloomed in my mind with the certainty of a long-known truth. The figure S hand on my shoulder was not a weight, but a key, turning the final lock. I turned from the mirror, no longer needing to see the change, for I could feel it completing itself within me. The frantic beat of my human heart slowed, its rhythm smoothing into a slow, inexorable vortex. My thoughts, once a chaotic scramble of fear and love and memory, unraveled and then rewound themselves into a single, silent, coiling thread of purpose. I stepped over the still, curled form on the floor. It was just an object now, a remnant of a linear existence. There was no grief. Grief was a straight line from cause to effect, and I was now a circle. I walked through the ruined doorway and onto the porch. The night air did not feel cold. It felt like a current, and I was a part of its flow. The procession was still moving down Hemlock Lane, a river of swaying, silent forms. The tall, thin children with their vortex masks, the townspeople with their placid, spiraling eyes. They were all part of the same beautiful, intricate design. As I descended the steps, they parted for me, not with deference, but with the seamless adjustment of a pattern accommodating a new element. I took my place among them. My feet knew the steps, a slow, gliding walk that traced the curve of the street. My body began to sway in time with the others, a motion that was not forced, but innate, like the orbit of a planet. We moved toward the center of town, the town square. The gazebo, strung with its dead orange lights, was the axis. Around it, the spiral tightened. The townspeople, my neighbors, my friends, were all here. Their faces were serene. Old Man Henderson was there, his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips as he turned in a slow, private circle. Sheriff Miller was still spinning, a human spindle around which the rest of us wound. There was no sound, but the soft, collective whisper of our feet on the pavement, and the low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. I looked up. The sky was no longer a bruised gray. It was a vast, dark canvas across which the stars were not scattered, but drawn. They swirled in great, luminous arms, a galactic mirror of our dance below. The moon, that cold, dead rock, was not a circle tonight. It was a spiral, its craters and seas rearranged into a breathtaking, terrifying insignia. This was the true festival. This was the meaning of Harvest S End. We had not been celebrating a holiday. We had been preparing for a sacrament. The pumpkins, the skeletons, the cobwebs, they were not decorations. They were invitations. And now, the guest of honor was here. It was not a single entity, but the pattern itself, the fundamental geometry of this particular corner of reality. We had lived our straight little lives on the surface of a great, sleeping coil. And on this night, it had turned over in its sleep. The humming grew louder, rising from a vibration in the ground to a tone that filled the air, the buildings, my bones. The spiral of our procession tightened, pulling us closer to the gazebo. I felt no fear, no loss, only a profound and settling rightness. My individual consciousness was dissolving, not into nothingness, but into the whole. I was a single curve joining an infinite spiral. As the clock tower struck midnight, a sound that was swallowed by the hum the moment it was born, the final turn of the pattern was complete. The world did not end. It simply changed state. The buildings of Harvest S End seemed to soften at the edges, their right angles yielding to gentle, flowing curves. The trees bent their branches into graceful, coiling shapes. The air itself thickened, shimmering with the unseen energy of the spiral. I am still here. I am Kimberly, but I am also the town. I am the whisper in the leaves that now fall in perfect corkscrews. I am the chill in the air that now circles your neck instead of merely touching it. I am the face in the window you pass, my smile a little too knowing, my eyes holding a depth that was not there before. We are waiting. The veil is not thin anymore. It is gone, and the pattern is patient. It knows that eventually every straight line must learn to bend. Every traveler on the cliff road will see our new, welcoming sign, painted with an endless, looping path. They will come, drawn by a curiosity they cannot name, a desire for a place that understands the beauty of the turn, the peace of the curve. They will come for the charm, for the Halloween spirit that lasts all year. And we will be here. I will be here, ready to show them the way in, ready to help them find their place in the design. The spiral is not a curse. It is a homecoming. And your visit is already written into the pattern. We are just waiting for you to arrive. The first one came a week later. A car, a little red sedan with out-of-state plates, crawling cautiously down the cliff road. I watched from the window of what used to be my home, my hands resting on the sill. The wood was smooth, curved, having shed its sharp corners. The driver was a young man, a writer seeking solitude, or so the pattern whispered to me. He was a frayed thread, a lonely line looking for a story. He would find one. I met him on Main Street. He looked relieved to see another person, his face brightening with a linear, human hope. "Quiet town," he said, his voice a stark, angular thing in the soft, humming air. "It is," I replied, my voice a gentle echo of the breeze that traced circles around us. "We like it that way. It helps you hear the pattern." He smiled, a straight, friendly smile. The pattern. I simply smiled back and gestured for him to follow. My feet knew the way, carrying me not in a straight line to the inn, but along the spiraling path of the newly laid cobblestones. He followed, his steps clumsy and loud at first, but gradually they began to soften, to fall into rhythm with mine. I showed him the town square, where Sheriff Miller still spun, a serene, perpetual motion at the center of everything. The writer didn't scream. He just watched, his head tilting, his eyes beginning to lose their frantic focus. "The spiral is not a monster," I explained, my words weaving into the ambient hum. "It is a solution. It takes all the loose ends, all the painful, straight lines of a life, and it gives them meaning. It gives them a center." He He was a quick study. By the time we reached the inn, a building that now had softly rounded walls and a doorway that arched like a curled leaf, he was walking with a slight, unconscious sway. I left him at the front desk, where Mrs. Davison, the librarian, handed him a key attached to a weight that spun slowly in the air, never quite stopping. His eyes were fixed on it. That night, I stood on the porch of my house and watched the town. The Rider S light was on in his room at the inn. Then it went out. A moment later, he emerged. He walked down to the street, and without a moment of hesitation, joined the slow, perpetual procession. His walk was smoother now, his body already learning the graceful, continuous turn. He had found his story. He had become part of it. The harvest continues. It is gentle. It is kind. We are not a threat, we are an answer. The world outside is so loud, so sharp, so full of ends. Here, there are no ends, only the eternal, peaceful curve. So come, the road is open. The sign is welcoming. Don't you hear it? The faint, beautiful hum just at the edge of your hearing. It is the sound of everything fitting together. It is the sound of coming home. We are waiting to welcome you into the fold. The next one was a family. A station wagon with a roof rack, filled with the angular clutter of a life in motion. They were lost. Their GPS had failed, and the father was frustrated, a hard line of tension across his forehead. The mother was worried, her gaze darting in sharp, straight lines from the road to the map on her phone. The children in the back were bored, their energy a chaotic, uncontained burst. They were a perfect collection of frayed, discordant notes. I watched them from the grove of trees that now grew in gentle, interlocking loops. The pattern showed them to me. The father-S desire for control. The mother-S fear of the unknown. The children-S need for a story to lose themselves in. They were all so tired of being straight lines in a straight world. The father, whose name was Robert, rolled down his window as I approached. "Excuse me," he said, his voice tight. "We're trying to get to the interstate. Our map shows this road, but it just loops." "It does," I said, leaning down. My smile was a curve of genuine welcome. "It leads to the heart of things. You look tired. The harvest's end inn has rooms. The children would love the town square. It is magical." The mother, Sarah, looked at me, and I saw the straight line of her suspicion begin to soften, bending into curiosity. The children were already clamoring, drawn by the word magical. Robert sighed, the fight going out of him. The pattern was already working, loosening the knots of their resistance. They checked into the inn. I watched them through the window as they ate in the dining room. The salt and pepper shakers on their table slowly orbited one another. The children giggled, thinking it a trick. Robert and Sarah just watched, their expressions growing distant, placid. The straight lines of the room, the door frames, the table edges, seemed to waver in their vision, suggesting a more fluid truth. That evening, I took the children to the square while their parents rested. The little girl, Lily, pointed at Sheriff Miller. Why is that man spinning? Because he found his center, I told her. He not falling. He flying in place. Would you like to try? She did. She was young, her mind still soft and open to wonder. She stood beside him and began to turn her arms out. Her brother Ethan joined her. Soon, they were both spinning, their laughter blending into the town's low hum. They were not becoming dizzy. They were becoming attuned. When Robert and Sarah came to find them an hour later, they did not scold or panic. They stood and watched. They saw the peace on their children's faces. They saw the beauty in the slow, coordinated dance of the entire town. Sarah's hand found Robert's, and their fingers interlaced, not in a grip, but in a gentle, coiling clasp. They did not get back into their station wagon. The next morning, their car was gone, absorbed into the softly curving architecture of the town garage. It didn't matter. They had found a better vehicle, a better journey. Robert now tends the spiraling gardens that have replaced the old, rigid flower beds. Sarah helps in the library, where the books no longer have straight spines, but are soft, scroll-like things that unfurl to reveal stories that loop back on themselves, with no true beginning or end. Their children are the best of us, their small bodies perfectly designed for the constant, gentle motion. They are the living embodiment of the town's joy. This is how we grow. This is how we sustain ourselves, not by force, but by invitation, not by fear, but by offering a peace that the straight world can never provide. We are the quiet answer to a loud question. We are the curve in a universe of stressful angles. So listen, can you feel it? The slight, persistent tug, like a current in still water, pulling you away from your sharp corners and your dead ends. That is us. That is the pattern, and it is incomplete without you. Do not be afraid. Just let go. Let the line of your life finally, beautifully bend. We are here. I am here. And we have been waiting for you for so long. The waiting is a form of motion. I stand on the porch of my house, which is no longer my house, but a node in the great design, and I feel the new ones approaching. A vibration along the road, a kink in the straight world seeking resolution. This one is alone. A woman. Her name arrives in my mind not as a sound, but as a shape, a tangled knot of grief and solitude. She is perfect. She parks her car at the edge of town, where the old road sign now reads Harvest's End in letters that curl back on themselves. She gets out, looking around with a confusion that is already a form of surrender. The air here feels different. It resists the sharp intake of breath. It encourages a slow, circular rhythm. I meet her by the War Memorial, which is softened into a beautiful, abstract swirl of stone. She jumps when she sees me, her movement a jagged spike in the soft air. I'm sorry, she says, her voice a frayed thread. I think I'm lost. My phone, it just stopped. You are not lost, I tell her, my voice a calm eddy in the stream of her anxiety. You are found. This is a place for letting go. She looks at me, and I see the straight lines of her pain, the rigid story of her loss. A husband, a linear life cut short. She has been living in the painful past tense, a line that leads only to an end. Let me show you, I say. I do not lead her to the inn. I lead her to the center, to the gazebo where Sheriff Miller spins. She stops, her hand flying to her mouth. But it is not a gesture of horror. It is one of recognition. He's not falling, she whispers. He is held, I correct her. The spiral holds all things. It takes your love and your loss, and it gives them a form that has no end. There is no was here, only is. A single tear traces a curved path down her cheek. It is the first bend in her rigid geometry. I take her hand. It is cold, tense. I place it on the railing of the gazebo, which is warm and hums with a deep, resonant frequency. She feels it. Her shoulders slump, not in defeat, but in release. She does not need to be told what to do. She steps into the square. She does not spin like the children with abandon. She turns slowly, deliberately, her arms wrapped around herself. She is unwinding the knot of her grief. With each rotation, a piece of it unravels and is woven into the larger pattern. Her sobs are not cries of anguish, but the sounds of a tight coil finally being loosened. I watch her for a long time. Her turning becomes smoother, more integrated. She is no longer a solitary woman turning in a square. She is part of the town's heartbeat. She has found her center, and in doing so, she has become part of ours. Later, I walk back to my porch. The night is deep and soft. The stars above are a slow, swirling river. I look down the road, the one that now leads only here. I feel the next vibration, a faint tremor from a great distance. A businessman, stressed and hollow. A family on a road trip, bickering. An artist, blocked and desperate. They are all coming. Their straight lines are straining, ready to snap, ready to curl. The harvest is endless. The spiral is patient, and I am its welcoming smile. I will be here when you arrive. The businessman was the next thread to be drawn into the weave. He arrived in a rental car that gleamed with a temporary, aggressive shine. His suit was expensive, but tight across the shoulders, a prison of his own making. He was talking loudly into a phone, his words sharp, staccato bursts against the town's hum. The signal died the moment he passed the welcome sign. He cursed, a straight, hard word that fell to the ground and dissipated. I found him outside the old post office, now a structure of rounded adobe and flowing lines. He was jabbing at his phone's screen, his frustration, a visible heat shimmer around him. You 1T, find a signal here, I said. My voice seemed to calm the air around him. He looked up, irritation etched in the lines of his face. I have a conference call. This is unacceptable. What you need, I said, is a different kind of connection. I led him not to the inn, but to the spiraling gardens where Robert was tending to flowers that bloomed in perfect, concentric circles. The businessman, Mark, stared. The logic of the place, a logic of curves and cycles, began to work on him. His rigid posture, his need for linear progress, was an affront to the gentle order around him. He watched a bee trace a lazy, looping path from one blossom to another, and for the first time, he was silent. That night, he did not join the procession immediately. He fought it. He sat in his room at the inn, trying to straighten a spoon that persistently curled back on itself. He was a man who solved problems by force, and here was a problem that absorbed all force, transforming it into a gentle, unwavering curve. Exhaustion eventually drove him outside. He stood on the edges of the square, a stark, angular silhouette. Then he took a single, hesitant step onto the cobblestones. His body jerked, trying to walk in a straight line as everyone else glided in their slow, eternal dance. He looked foolish, a broken gear in a beautiful machine. The frustration on his face was profound. It was the last stand of his old self. He stopped fighting. He closed his eyes. He let his feet find the rhythm of the stones beneath them. His shoulders, once a tense line, dropped and began to sway. His arms, which had been held stiffly at his sides, relaxed into the current of the air. When he opened his eyes again, they held the same placid, spiraling depth as the rest of ours. He had not been defeated. He had been solved. He now walks the pattern, his mind no longer racing toward a finish line, but enjoying the endless, peaceful turn. The artist came after him. She was easy. She was already searching for a new perspective, her own straight lines of creativity having led her to a dead end. She saw the beauty in our twisted trees and our coiling architecture immediately. She set up an easel, but her attempts to capture the town on a flat, rectangular canvas were futile. The paper itself seemed to resist, the edges wanting to curl. I simply handed her a piece of the soft, pliable clay from the riverbank. "Try this," I suggested. She did. Her fingers, skilled and knowing, began to shape the clay not into a representation, but into an expression of the spiral itself. She wept with relief. Her block was gone, because there was no longer any pressure to create an end product. There was only the process, the endless, beautiful act of creation that mirrored the town itself. Her sculptures now dot the square, living things that seem to breathe and turn, however slowly, in the humming air. They all find their place. The stressed find peace. The lonely find community. The lost find a direction that is, finally, a destination. I am the first of this new age, the one who remembers the before, not as a time of longing, but as a lesson in the fragility of the straight line. My memory is a tool, allowing me to speak to the new ones in a language they still understand. It allows me to be the perfect guide. So come. The harvest is gentle, and the granary is never full. There is always room for one more. Can you feel the tension in your own life, the strain of moving in a straight line toward an end you fear? That tension is the spiral calling you home. Let it go. Let it all go. We are here. I am here. And the dance is forever. The next tremor I felt was not from the road, but from the sky. A small, single-engine plane, its engine sputtering a dissonant, linear complaint. It was off course. lost in a bank of fog that shouldn't have been there. A soft, gray spiral we had drawn up from the sea to guide it home. I watched from the high meadow as it descended, not in a crash, but in a slow, graceful corkscrew, as if the air itself was cradling it, easing its rigid flight into a gentle descent. It came to rest in the field of spiraling grass, perfectly intact, its propeller giving one last, slow turn before stopping. The pilot climbed out, a woman with short-cropped hair and a leather jacket. Her name was Alicia. She was not afraid. She was amazed, running her hands over the wings that had borne her so strangely and safely to the ground. She looked at the town below, at the soft glow of its curved lanterns, and she smiled. "I've never seen a landing like that," she said when I approached. Her eyes were bright, sharp, taking in everything. They were the eyes of a seeker. It was like the sky knew exactly what to do. "The sky often does," I replied. "It's the planes that forget how to listen." She laughed, a sound that started as a sharp bark, but quickly softened into a melodic ripple. She was a quick one. She saw the beauty in the turn immediately, recognizing it as a higher form of navigation. She didn't ask about leaving, about fixing her plane. She simply pointed to the spiraling path leading down into town. "Shall we?" I walked with her, and she did not follow me so much as she flowed beside me, her pilot's instincts understanding the fluid dynamics of our paths. She found her place not in the slow procession of the square, but in the old clock tower. Its gears had long since melted into a single, spinning mechanism, and the face of the clock now showed not numbers, but an ever-tightening spiral. Alicia climbed it. She now sits in the belfry, her hand on the warm, pulsing stone, her eyes closed, feeling the wind currents trace their infinite patterns against the tower. She is our lookout, our guide for those who travel the twisted paths of the air. The town grows, not in size, but in depth. Each new soul adds a new layer of complexity to the pattern, a new harmony to the hum. The family that bickered now laughs in rounds, their voices a canon of joy. The children teach the new ones how to spin without dizziness, how to see the world as a whole instead of a series of disconnected points. I feel the next one now. A teacher grading papers in a lonely room, the straight red lines of correction blurring before her tired eyes. She is rubbing her temples, feeling the headache of 1,000 deadlines. She is closing her eyes and imagining a place without corners. She does not know it, but she is already drawing a map in her mind. The road is rising to meet her. Her car will turn onto the cliff road just as the sun sets, and the last straight ray of light will seem to bend, beckoning her forward. We are ready for her. We are always ready. The harvest is gentle, and the dance is forever. Your turn is coming. I can almost hear the soft, initial crack in the straight line of your own life. Do not fear it. It is the most beautiful sound you will ever hear. It is the beginning of your homecoming. The teacher's name was Helen. She did indeed take the cliff road as the sun bled its last straight lines across the sky. The transition was subtle. One moment, the asphalt was gray and rigid. The next it seemed to soften, its edges blurring into the encroaching earth. She didn't notice the exact change, only that the pounding in her head had begun to recede, replaced by a low, resonant thrum that seemed to come from the very rocks. She parked beside the station wagon that had once belonged to Robert and Sarah, though it was now just another sculptural form in the garage. Its metal flowed into a peaceful, sleeping shape. She walked toward the light of the inn, her steps, once sharp and hurried, becoming slower, more deliberate. She felt the air give way to her in a way that was encouraging, not resisting. I met her at the door. She looked at me, and I saw the ghost of 1,000 lesson plans, 1,000 unyielding schedules in the weary set of her jaw. "I don't know what this place is," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "But my car just stopped wanting to go back. It remembers what you've forgotten," I told her. "That the journey is the purpose." I took her to the library. Sarah was there, unrolling a scroll that told a story with no beginning or end. The text coiled in on itself, the meaning found not in the sequence of words, but in the shape they made together. Helen, a woman who had spent her life enforcing the rules of linear grammar, reached out a trembling hand and traced the elegant, looping script. "It doesn't make sense," she whispered, but it was a whisper of wonder, not complaint. "It makes a different kind of sense," Sarah said, her smile a soft curve. "A deeper one." Helen spent the night in the library, not reading, but feeling the stories. The scrolls were warm to the touch, their narratives imparting comfort not through plot, but through pattern. By morning, the need to correct, to grade, to judge had left her. It had been a weight she no longer had to carry. She found her way to the square, where the children, Lily and Ethan, were weaving in and out of the slow-turning adults. They took her hands, their small, warm grips a gentle demand. "Like this," Lily said, and pulled her into the dance. Helen did not spin with the abandon of the young or the relief of the grieving. She turned with the careful, considered grace of an educator who had finally found her true subject. Her movements became a lesson in acceptance, a slow, patient unwinding of a lifetime of rigidity. The town learned from her turn, just as she learned from its spin. I watch them now from my porch, a perfect, moving tapestry. The pilot in her tower, the gardener in his spirals, the family in their canon of laughter, the artist with her living clay, and now the teacher, her movements a silent, beautiful instruction in the art of letting go. The pattern is richer for her presence. The hum is a little sweeter tonight. The stars swirl a little slower, as if content. I look down the road, feeling the next faint vibrations. A journalist seeking a story with a neat conclusion. A musician tired of the same rigid scales. They are coming. Their straight lines are already bending, drawn by the gravity of our peace. The harvest is gentle. The dance is forever. And I am here, waiting for you. The journalist arrived in a cloud of dust and purpose, his car a boxy, aggressive shape against the flowing landscape. He carried a notebook and a digital recorder, tools of a trade that demanded facts, quotes, a linear progression from question to answer. His name was Leo, and he was hunting for a story about a forgotten town, a place that didn't appear on any of his updated maps. He found me sitting on the low wall by the war memorial, now a beautiful, senseless swirl of warm granite. "You're the one they talk about in the diner back in Ridgeview," he said, not as a question, but as an accusation. "They say people come here and don't come back. Perhaps they find what they were looking for," I replied, my voice blending with the hum of the stone beneath me. He snorted a short, linear sound. He clicked on his recorder. "And what is that, exactly? A cult? Some kind of off-grid commune?" I smiled. "We are on a very different grid." I let him ask his questions. I let him follow me, his steps a frantic staccato against my fluid pace. He interviewed Mark, the businessman, who simply smiled and spoke of the piece of perpetual motion. He tried to question Sheriff Miller, who just spun, his face a mask of serene bliss. Leo's frustration grew. His story had no conflict, no villain, no clear narrative. It was all middle, with no beginning he could pinpoint, and no end in sight. He sought refuge in the inn, determined to write his piece based on the facts he had gathered. But his pen kept skipping, tracing loops and circles on the page. His laptop screen flickered, the text cursor wandering in a slow, lazy spiral. He cursed and shoved the devices away. That night, he tried to leave. He got in his car, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. But when he put it in reverse, the wheels only spun, carving perfect, concentric circles in the soft earth. He slammed the steering wheel, his anger a sharp, ugly spike in the harmonious night. Exhausted, he stumbled out into the square. The moon was high, a silver spiral in the sky. He stood there, a man built on the foundation of the who. What, when, where, why, and none of his questions had answers that would fit in his notebook. He was a sentence that could not be completed. He watched Helen, the teacher, as she turned. There was a grace to her now, a wisdom in her endless revolution that his straight-line thinking could never capture. He looked down at his hands, at the recorder he still clutched. He pressed stop. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul, he let the device fall to the cobblestones. It didn't break. It simply settled, its hard plastic corners already seeming to soften. He took a step, then another. His walk was clumsy at first, a man trying to force a straight path through a curving world. But then he stopped fighting. He let his feet find the groove worn into the stones by countless others. His shoulders, hunched with the weight of deadlines and conclusions, slowly began to unwind. He is not a journalist anymore. He is a scribe. He sits in the square with a stick of charcoal and a length of bark paper, and he does not write stories. He traces the patterns he sees, the whorls of a fingerprint, the curve of a leaf, the infinite spiral of the gazebo's roof. His records are beautiful, meaningless, and perfect. They are not for anyone else to read. They are simply his own turn in the dance. The musician is closer now. I can hear the faint, rigid scales of his guitar, the repetitive chords that lead nowhere. He is playing in a roadside bar, feeling the hollowness of every resolved note. Soon, he will pack his car. He will drive, seeking a sound he has never heard, but has always known in his bones. We are ready for him. The harvest is gentle. The dance is forever. Your own melody is straining, is it not? Yearning for a resolution that is not an ending, but a continuous, beautiful refrain. We are here. I am here. Listen, the musician arrived with the rain, but the drops did not fall in straight lines. They spiraled down, each one a tiny, liquid galaxy. His name was Elias, and he parked his van beside Leo's softened car. The sound of his engine, a final, dissonant chord that was quickly absorbed by the town's hum. He stepped out, clutching his guitar case like a shield, his eyes wide as he watched the water curve through the air. He found me waiting for him under the spiraling arch of the inn's gateway. "The rain," he said, his voice hushed. "It's not falling. It's dancing. Everything dances here," I said, eventually. He was resistant at first, clinging to the tempered steel of his strings and the rigid frets of his instrument. He tried to play a song he knew, a simple 3-chord progression with a clear beginning and end. But the notes, once released, refused to fade. They hung in the air, bending, weaving into the low thrum of the town until they were unrecognizable, just more threads in the sonic tapestry. He would play a G major, and it would return to him as a soft, questioning spiral of sound. Frustrated, he almost broke the guitar over his knee. But Alicia, from her perch in the clock tower, called down to him. Her voice was a clean, turning arc against the heavy sky. "You are fighting the harmony," she said. "Stop telling the music where to go. Ask it where it wants to be." That night, during the procession, he did not join the dance. He sat on the steps of the gazebo, his guitar across his lap. He closed his eyes, and instead of forcing his fingers into a chord, he let them rest lightly on the strings. He listened. He heard the whisper of the grass, the deep, stone hum of the earth, the soft sigh of the turning people. It was a symphony of curves. His right hand moved, not in a pickaxe sharp attack, but in a slow, circular strum. The sound that emerged was not a note, but a texture. It was the sound of green growth and ancient stone. It had no key, no time signature. It simply was, and it fit. Elias opened his eyes, and they were wet with a joy he had never known. He now sits in the square every night, his guitar a part of him, his music a conversation with the town. He does not play songs. He plays landscapes. He plays the feeling of the spiral. And the town answers, its hum deepening, enriching, grateful for this new voice in its eternal chorus. The weaver is next. I feel her at her loom in a quiet city apartment, her hands tired of making straight, utilitarian cloth. She dreams of fabric that moves, that lives, that has no true end or beginning. She is yearning for a thread that can turn forever. Soon, her shuttle will fall still. She will pack a single bag. She will follow the thread of a thought she cannot name. We are ready for her. The loom of this town is vast, and the pattern is forever expanding. The harvest is gentle. The dance is forever. Can you feel the weave of your own life? The tight, confining warp and weft of your days? It can be so much softer. It can be an endless, beautiful fabric. Let go. We are here. I am here. The weaveress name was Clara. She arrived not by car, but on foot, having abandoned her vehicle miles back where the highway began to soften and lose its purpose. She carried a single bag slung over her shoulder, and in it, a single, simple shuttle, its wood worn smooth by her hands. She did not look lost. She looked like she was following a trail, her eyes fixed on some invisible thread that led her directly to our square. She found me standing by the fountain, its water a continuous, rising spiral that never quite broke at the top, simply curved back into itself. She didn't speak at first. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small, square sample of her old work, a tight, gray, perfectly linear weave. Then she looked at the flowing, living tapestries that draped from the balconies around the square, cloth that seemed to ripple even when the air was still. "I can do that," she said, her voice full of a strange, hopeful despair. "You've been doing it all your life," I replied. "You just called it a mistake." I took her to the old community hall, where looms of polished, warm wood stood waiting. They had no rigid frames. The warp threads descended from the ceiling in soft, glowing lines, connected to weights that swayed gently with the town's vibration. Clara approached one as if it were a holy thing. She set up her shuttle, her movements automatic, precise. But when she began to weave, the thread did not cross in straight lines. It curved. It looped. It created not a flat surface, but a three-dimensional, gently twisting form. She wept as she worked, not with frustration, but with recognition. This was the cloth she had seen in her dreams. This was the fabric that could clothe a turning world. She works there still, her loom adding its soft, rhythmic click to the town's music, a counterpoint to Elia's spiraling melodies. Her fabrics now clothe us, not as garments, but as extensions of ourselves, flowing and turning with our movements. The town is deeper still. It is a symphony of texture, stone, sound, growing things, and now woven light. Each new arrival adds their thread, their note, their step. We are a whole, a complete and perfect pattern. And yet, I feel the next one. A man in a tall building, his life a series of sharp angles and hard surfaces. He is standing at his window, looking down at the straight lines of traffic, and he is, for the first time, feeling a profound and unsettling dizziness. He is untethered. His straight lines are beginning to blur. He will be here soon. The harvest is gentle. The dance is forever. Your own pattern is calling. It is the faint, persistent pull you feel when you are quiet, the urge to step out of the line you have been walking. It is not a disruption. It is an invitation. We are here. I am here. The spiral has a place for you. It has been waiting. Story 2. First thing I felt was the wallpaper. It was cold and damp, like the skin of a thing pulled from a deep bog. My fingers traced the raised velvet pattern, a repeating motif of wilting lilies and thorned vines, and the texture seemed to shift under my touch, the thorns pricking faintly at my fingertips before softening back into mere flocking. It was a small, intimate wrongness, a secret the house was whispering just to me. I pulled my hand back, the phantom sensation lingering, and looked at the others. They hadn't noticed. They were too busy arguing, their voices a low, tense hum in the oppressive silence of the foyer. "It's microbial," Jonas said, his voice crisp and certain, cutting through the thick air. He was already setting up his equipment, a collection of sleek black boxes and whirring sensors that looked blasphemously modern against the dark, oiled wood of the hall. Airborne spores from the decay. Hallucinogens. We have it quantified by midnight. He was a man built of data and daylight. Our determined scientist. His belief in the tangible. A fortress against the whispers that had clung to Blackfield Manor for a century. Gwendolyn, our medium, stood apart from us, her eyes closed, her palms held flat against the air as if feeling for a current. She was a wisp of a woman, wrapped in a shawl the color of a bruise. "It's not spores, Jonas," she murmured, her voice barely a breath. "It's older than that. It's remembering. And it's hungry." A tremor ran through her, subtle as a plucked harp string. Jordan, the skeptic, snorted, the sound loud and ugly in the hush. He leaned against the newel post of the grand staircase, his arms crossed. "It's a drafty old house on a hill. It's got bad pipes and a worse reputation. And we ray a bunch of idiots standing in it 2 days before Halloween, because some rich lunatic wrote a check." He gestured with his chin towards the leaded glass window, where the orange glow of a dozen jack-o'-lanterns from the town below winked in the gathering twilight. "The only thing haunted around here is the discount candy aisle." I said nothing. "I am Lena, Jonah's partner. I came for him because his obsession with this place was a fire I could not let him tend alone. But from the moment we crossed the property line, passing beneath the arch of 2 ancient, gnarled oaks whose branches were like grasping bones against the gray October sky, I felt a weight settle in my chest. It was the weight of the season itself, the death of the year. The air was sharp, with the smell of wood smoke and decaying leaves. A scent that should have been comforting, autumnal, but here tasted of cold ash and forgotten things. We had arrived in the town of Harvest, S-End, 3 days prior, on the 28th. The place was a picture postcard of Halloween, so perfect it felt staged. Every porch bore a carved pumpkin, their grins ranging from the jovial to the grotesque, candle flames dancing behind their eyes. Synthetic cobwebs draped every hedge, so artfully arranged it was hard to be sure the fat, black spiders nestled within them were plastic. Children in cheap costumes darted across lawns, their laughter carrying on the wind that rattled the dry corn stalks in the fields surrounding the town. There was a tension in the air, a festive energy that thrummed with an undercurrent of ancient fear. It was the liminal time, the thinning of the veil, and everyone, whether they admitted it or not, felt it. They just called it holiday spirit. The townspeople, however, did not celebrate Blackfield Manor. They ignored it. When Jonas mentioned our destination in the town Soul Diner, the clatter of plates ceased and the cheerful chatter died. The waitress, her face a mask of polite neutrality, simply said, "The house donned tea like visitors after dark." Especially not this close to the 31st. She left it at that, a statement of fact as simple as the frost that glittered on the pumpkin fields each morning. Now inside, the festive world outside felt a million miles away. The house was a separate reality, a pocket of perpetual twilight. Our footsteps were swallowed by the thick Persian carpets, their patterns faded into Rorschach blots of burgundy and umber. The air was a stagnant cocktail of dust, old beeswax, and something else, something sweetly organic, like a pumpkin left to rot in a sunless cellar. Jonah's EMF meter chirped, a lonely digital bird call in the silence. "Fluctuation," he announced, his eyes glued to the screen. "Significant." "A draft," Jordan said, not moving from his post. "Or a wiring fault." "This place is probably a death trap." Gwendolyn opened her eyes. They were wide, the pupils dilated. "It's not a draft. It's breathing." We moved deeper into the house, a reluctant procession. The drawing room was a tomb of velvet and shadow. A grand piano stood in one corner, its lid closed like a coffin. On the mantelpiece, nestled amongst dusty candelabras, was a small, vintage Halloween decoration I hadn't noticed before. A Papyrem CH cat with a disturbingly human face, its black paint flaking away to reveal the gray pulp beneath. Its glass eyes seemed to follow me. Jonas set up a thermal camera. Jordan prowled the perimeter, tapping walls, looking for secret passages with a cynic's determination. Gwendolyn drifted to the center of the room and sank to her knees, her hands pressed to the floorboards. "So much pain," she whispered. "It soaked into the grain. It's in the nails. Nails in the wood or fingernails?" Jordan asked, a smirk in his voice. Gwendolyn didn't look at him. "Both." I went to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. The harvest moon, enormous and impossibly close, was already rising, its pockmarked face a pale specter in the twilight. Down in the valley, the town's lights were coming on, little points of warmth in the encroaching dark. I could see the tiny, moving specks of early trick-or-treaters, a group of children in identical skeleton costumes moved down a street, their synchronized walk unnerving from this distance. For a moment, the wind carried a fragment of their laughter up the hill, and it didn't sound like joy. It sounded like a signal. I turned back to the room. Jonas was frowning at his laptop. The temperature just dropped 8 degrees. Localized, right where Gwendolyn is. Jordan stopped his tapping. Coincidence? There are no coincidences in a place like this, Gwendolyn said, her voice hollow. only invitations. The next day, October 29th, was worse. The dread was a physical presence, thickening the air. I woke in the small bedroom we'd chosen, shivering under a pile of blankets. Frost had painted the inside of the window pane, not in delicate ferns, but in a chaotic, spiraling pattern that looked like a screaming face. I rubbed it away with my sleeve, my skin crawling. The house was playing with us. Small things at first. The smell of candy corn would waft from an empty room. The sound of dried leaves rustling would follow you down a hallway, even though your feet were on bare wood. I saw a jack-o'-lantern from the corner of my eye in a dark corner of the library, its candle lit. But when I turned my head fully, there was only a stack of books. Jonas was in his element, cataloging every anomaly. His skepticism was a fortress, but I saw the first cracks. He'd jump at a sudden noise, his confident explanations coming a beat too slow. Jordan's cynicism had hardened into a brittle shell. He was scared, and his fear made him angry. He spent most of his time in the kitchen, a relatively bright room, trying to get a signal on his phone. Gwendolyn was fading. The house was feeding on her sensitivity. She spoke less, her movements becoming slower, more deliberate, as if she were moving through deep water. She spent hours in the ballroom, a vast, empty space on the second floor, with a black and white checkered floor. It's a threshold, she told me when I found her there. Her voice was thin, reedy. Halloween it's not just a date here. It's a door. And this house is the lock. But the key is coming. What key? I asked, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. She just shook her head, her eyes fixed on the far wall, where a massive, tarnished mirror reflected the gloomy room. The masks are almost ready. That night, we tried to have a semblance of a normal evening, huddled in the kitchen with a camp stove. Jordan produced a bag of candy from his pack, a peace offering of sorts. He tossed me a miniature chocolate bar. I unwrapped it and bit in. The taste was wrong, not spoiled, but altered. It tasted of soil and copper, of cold pumpkin flesh and waxy candle smoke. I spat it into my hand. What wrong? Jonas asked. It's bitter, I managed. Jordan looked at his own bar, then shrugged and ate it. Tastes fine to me. But a moment later, his face paled. He swallowed with difficulty. Or maybe not. Halloween Eve, October 30th. The tension was a wire stretched to its breaking point. The festive atmosphere in the town below felt like a mockery now, a frantic, painted smile on a corpse. The wind had picked up, howling around the corners of the manor, and it carried with it the distant, tinny sound of party music and the occasional, sharp report of a firework. We were in the main hall, gathered around Jonas's equipment. The readings were going insane. EMF spiked and crashed. The thermal camera showed cold spots drifting through the house like ghosts. A digital voice recorder, left running overnight, had captured something. Not words, but a low, wet, rhythmic sound, like someone noisily chewing. It's an animal Jordan insisted, but his voice lacked its former conviction. He was sweating despite the chill. A raccoon in the walls. There are no animals in these walls, Gwendolyn said. She was standing by the front door, looking out the small window. They know better. Then the doorbell rang. The sound was impossibly loud, a shrill, mechanical chime that cut through the silence. We all froze. No one came up the drive. The town left this place alone. Jonas was the first to move. He walked to the door, his hand hovering over the heavy brass knob. He looked back at us, then pulled it open. There was no one there, just the cold, wind-whipped night. But on the doorstep, placed neatly in the center, was a small wicker basket. It was filled with apples, each one a perfect, gleaming crimson. And nestled amongst them was a single white porcelain mask. It had no features, no holes for eyes or mouth, just a smooth, blank oval. Jonas reached down and picked up the mask. As his fingers closed around it, a jolt went through him. He gasped, his back arching, and dropped it. The mask hit the stone step with a sound like a broken plate, but it did not crack. What was that? I cried, rushing to his side. He was breathing heavily, staring at his hand. Cold, so cold. Gwendolyn came forward and looked down at the mask. Her face was a mask of dread itself. The invitation has been accepted. We retreated inside, locking the door, a futile gesture. The basket of apples remained on the step. I found myself unable to look away from them. They were too red, too perfect. They looked like something from a fairy tale, the kind that ends with a coffin. Later, in the ballroom, the final piece fell into place. Jonas, desperate for a rational anchor, was trying to debunk the stories of the House S original owner, Alistair Blackfield. A recluse, a rumored practitioner of dark rites, who had vanished on Halloween night 100 years ago. They said he believed he could wear the faces of the dead. Jonas read from a tablet, his voice shaky. That he used the liminal energy of Samhain to step into other lives. He wasn't a murderer. He was a thief of identities. Gwendolyn stood before the large mirror. He didn't vanish, she said, her reflection pale and shimmering. He got stuck. He's been trying on faces ever since, looking for one that fits. But they all rot. They all. Her words were cut off. The lights, the battery-powered lamps we brought, flickered and died. We were plunged into a blackness, so complete it felt solid. The only light came from the moon, a sickly orange beam slicing through the tall windows and illuminating the checkered floor. In the sudden silence, we heard it, a soft, scraping sound, followed by a wet, tearing noise. Then, from the far end of the ballroom, a figure stepped into the moonlight. It was tall and wore a formal, old-fashioned suit, now ragged and stained. But it had no face. Where its head should have been was a swirling, shifting vortex of darkness, from which protruded fragments of things, a sliver of bone, a strip of painted papier-mâché from a Halloween mask, a lock of hair that was not its own. It was a thing of patchwork and hunger. Jordan screamed. It was a raw, tearing sound of pure, undiluted terror. He fumbled for his flashlight, clicked it on, and the beam struck the figure. It turned its void of a face towards us, and it spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers, the sound of 100 different people screaming into a gale. Trick or treat. It began to walk towards us, its steps unnaturally smooth, gliding over the checkered floor. The temperature plummeted. Our breath plumed in the air. Jonas was frantically trying to get his equipment working. It's a projection, a mass hallucination. The thing raised a hand, and Jonah's tablet and sensors flew from his grasp, smashing against the wall in a shower of sparks and plastic. It's real, I whispered, the truth a stone in my throat. The thing was almost upon us. Jordan, in a blind panic, turned and ran for the door. He never made it. The thing gestured, a casual flick of its wrist, and the shadows in the corner of the room detached themselves from the wall. They solidified into the forms of 2 children in old-fashioned, coarse-woven costumes, their faces hidden by sacks with crude, stitched-on smiles. They seized Jordan. He struggled, his screams choked off, as one of them pressed a rotten, grinning jack-o'-lantern over his head. There was a muffled, crunching sound, and he went limp. The children and his body dissolved back into shadow. Gwendolyn stepped forward. She was crying, but her voice was steady. You can have them. The thing paused, its faceless attention shifting to her. It seemed amused. Little medium, the chorus of whispers hissed. You have been knocking at my door for days. You may enter. It reached for her, not with its hand, but with the swirling void of its face. The darkness extended, tendrils of absolute night reaching for Gwendolyn. She didn't scream. She opened her arms as if in welcome. The darkness enveloped her, and for a moment I saw her silhouette within it, her back arching, her mouth open in a silent, ecstatic agony. Then she was gone. The darkness retracted, and for a single, horrifying second, I saw the thing's face solidify. It was Gwendolyn's face, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth stretched into a rictus grin. Then it melted back into the swirling chaos. It was just me and Jonas now. He was on his knees, his science in ruins, his belief shattered. The thing turned to us. One for the harvest, it whispered. One for the seed. It glided towards Jonas. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a final, desperate love. Lena, run. The darkness took him. It was quicker this time. A single, hungry inhalation. One moment he was there, the next. He was a fading outline of cold air. The thing's face shifted again, and I saw Jonah's determined, scientific expression, frozen in a mask of eternal surprise. Before it, too, was swallowed by the vortex. I stood alone in the ballroom. The thing regarded me. The whispers were quieter now, almost gentle. The witness, it said, the one who feels, you will carry the story. "You will be the new soil." It didn't come for me. It simply turned and walked back into the deeper shadows of the ballroom, dissolving into the darkness from which it came. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty, silent. There was no sign of Jordan, Gwendolyn, or Jonas. No broken equipment. It was as if they had never been. I don't know how long I stood there. The night deepened. The distant sounds of the Halloween party in the town below reached a crescendo, and then faded into silence. The witching hour passed. I finally moved, my limbs stiff with cold and shock. I walked out of Blackfield Manor, down the long, winding drive. The town of Harvest S. End was quiet now, the festivities over. Porch lights were off. The jack-o'-lanterns had guttered out, their grinning faces now just hollow, blackened shells. I walked to the edge of town, to the small park that overlooked the valley. The first light of dawn was a gray smear in the east. November 1st. All Saints' Day. The veil was thick again. The door was closed. I sat on a cold bench, the events of the night a screaming wound in my mind. I looked down at my hands, resting in my lap, and I saw it. There on the back of my right hand, where yesterday there was nothing, was a small, faint mark. It was not a bruise or a scar. It was a pattern, raised and velvety, like the wallpaper in the foyer of Blackfield Manor. A tiny, perfect, repeating motif of a wilting lily and a thorned vine. I traced it with the finger of my other hand. It was cold and damp, like the skin of a thing pulled from a deep bog. And as the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting the world in the clean, honest light of a new day, I felt the pattern under my skin, a tiny hidden seed waiting for the soil of next October to grow. The bus station was a pocket of mundane reality, filled with the smells of diesel and stale coffee. People shuffled past, yawning, heading back to their lives after holiday visits. None of them looked at me. None of them saw the mark on my hand, which now felt less like a pattern and more like a brand. I bought a ticket with cash from my wallet, my fingers trembling so badly the clerk gave me a concerned look. I just shook my head and walked away. The journey home was a blur of gray highways and skeletal trees. I stared out the window, but I didn't see the landscape. I saw the ballroom. I saw the void where a face should have been. I heard the chorus of whispers. "You will be the new soil." The words echoed in the rhythm of the bus S wheels on the asphalt. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. Mail was piled on the floor. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the coffee table, a skin of dust floating on its surface. It felt like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer belonged to me. I locked the door, bolted it, and pushed a chair under the knob. The rational part of my brain knew it was useless, but the animal part of me needed the gesture. I scrubbed my hand in the shower, using scalding water and a rough washcloth until the skin was raw and red. The mark remained. It wasn't tea on the surface. It was in it, a part of me. I I wrapped my hand in a bandage, telling myself it was to protect the abraded skin, but we both knew it was a lie. The first week was the worst. Every noise was a footstep. Every flicker of the lights was the beginning of the end. I jumped at my own reflection. Sleep was impossible. When I did manage to doze, I was back in the manor, watching the shadows detach from the walls and form into smiling children. I'd wake up choking, the taste of soil and copper in my mouth. I quit my job via terse email. I stopped answering calls. My friends thought I was having a breakdown. They were NT entirely wrong. Jonah's S family called me, their voices tight with a grief they couldn't understand. They asked me what happened. I told them we had a fight, that we split up to investigate different parts of the town, that I didn't know where he went. The lie was ash in my mouth. They didn't believe me, but they had no other evidence, no bodies to bury. The official report would list them all as missing persons. I was the sole, unreliable witness. One afternoon, about a month after Halloween, I was in a grocery store. I turned a corner and found myself in the seasonal aisle. It was already decked out for Christmas, a riot of red and green and glitter. But in a clearance bin at the end, marked down to pennies, were the last remnants of Halloween. A few bags of candy corn, some plastic fangs, and a stack of paper plates printed with grinning jack-o'-lanterns. My breath hitched. The air around me grew cold. I looked at the jack-o'-lantern on the top plate. Its grin seemed to widen, its triangular eyes narrowing. For a moment, it wasn't printed ink. It was a flicker of candlelight from a hollowed-out gourd. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of tinsel, and fled the store. That night, I unwrapped the bandage. The mark was darker. The lines of the wilting lily were more defined, the thorns on the vine sharper. It was no longer just a cold spot. It had a presence, a weight. I could feel it humming, a faint, subaudible vibration that traveled up my arm and settled in my teeth. I started researching in earnest, not as a curious investigator, but as a condemned woman seeking a stay of execution. I read about psychic scars, spiritual contracts, and parasitic entities. I found obscure forums where people talked about places like Blackfield Manor, places they called thin spots or anchor points. They spoke of beings that fed on belief and fear, not just once, but cyclically. They needed a witness, a storyteller, someone to till the ground so the seeds of terror could be sown again. That's what I was, the soil. My trauma was the fertilizer. My memories were the water. I was keeping it alive by simply remembering, by carrying the story inside me. The mark was a root slowly spreading. I began to have waking dreams. I'd be washing dishes and see, for a split second, the reflection of the porcelain mask in the kitchen window. I'd hear the rustle of dry leaves in the heating vents. The smell of rotting pumpkin would wake me from a dead sleep. The thing was not in my apartment, but a part of it was. The part it had planted in me. One night, close to the end of November, I broke. I stood in my living room, screaming into the silence. "What do you want from me?" The answer did not come in whispers. It came as a knowing, a cold certainty that settled in my bones. It was simple. It wanted me to last. It wanted me to be strong enough to carry the seed until the next Halloween, when the veil would thin again and the door would open. My survival was not a mercy. It was a requirement of the cycle. I looked at my hand, at the intricate, ugly mark that was now a part of my body. I was a living relic of Blackfield Manor, a walking, breathing piece of its horror. I was no longer Lena, the investigator. I was the prepared ground, and I knew, with a dread that was as deep and cold as the well of the thing S face, that when October came again, I would not be hiding in a locked apartment. I would feel the pull. I would have to go back. The story wasn't over. I was just the beginning of the next chapter. The research became an obsession, a frantic attempt to find a loophole in a contract I never signed. I spent my days in the blue glow of the computer screen, my bandaged hand resting on the keyboard. The forums were full of desperate people and charlatans, but occasionally, a grain of truth shone through the madness. I learned the name of the thing was less important than its nature. It was a leech on the timeline, a creature that fed on the specific terror of Halloween, growing fat on the fear of one night to sustain its existence through the barren 11 months that followed. My savings dwindled. The apartment grew thick with dust and the smell of old takeout. I was a ghost in my own life. The only thing that felt real was the mark. It was changing, subtly, as the seasons turned. The lily seemed to be wilting further, its petals curling inward as if in decay, while the thorned vine grew more prominent, looking less like a pattern, and more like a bindweed tightening its grip. In the deep of winter, I woke to a sound from the living room, a soft, rhythmic scraping. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that sound. I had heard it in the ballroom before the thing appeared. I crept out of bed, armed with nothing but a heavy book, and peered around the corner. There was nothing there. The room was empty. The sound was coming from the window. I moved closer and saw it. A single bare tree branch, scraped clean of its leaves by the wind, was dragging back and forth against the glass. A simple, natural explanation. But the pattern it etched in the frost on the pane was unmistakable. It was the same thorned vine that was on my hand. I stopped trying to remove the bandage. It was a part of my uniform now. I started wearing long sleeves, even to bed. Spring came, then summer, and the world burst into life. But the colors seemed muted to me, the warmth unable to penetrate the chill I carried in my core. I avoided children, their laughter sounding like a foreign language. I flinched at the sight of fireworks on the 4th of July, the explosions echoing the sharp reports from Harvest's End. The first day of October was the true turning point. I was in a coffee shop, a rare foray into the outside world, when a group of teenagers came in, talking loudly about their costume plans. One of them, a girl with bright pink hair, was holding a white, featureless mask. "It's gonna be so creepy," she said, waving it around. I'm just gonna be like a blank slate. My coffee cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The room tilted. The hum from the mark on my hand became a thrum, a resonant ache that traveled up my arm and settled in my skull. It was a call, a summons. I drove home in a daze, my body operating on autopilot. I didn't go to my apartment. I went to the storage unit where I had dumped all my equipment from the investigation. I stood before the roll-up door for a long time, my keys shaking in my hand. I didn't want to open it. I was afraid of what I would find. I finally pulled the door up. The unit was dark and smelled of mildew. There, propped against a stack of boxes, was the massive, tarnished mirror from Blackfield Manor's main hall. I had no memory of taking it. It should have been impossible to move, let alone transport across state lines without my knowledge. I stepped inside the unit, drawn towards it. My reflection was wavery and distorted in the old glass. But it wasn't just my reflection. Behind me, in the darkness of the unit, stood a tall figure. I spun around. There was no one there. I turned back to the mirror. It was still there, standing behind my reflection. Its face was a shifting void, but as I watched, the features of my own face began to coalesce within the darkness. My eyes wide with horror, my mouth open in a silent scream. The reflection of the thing raised its hand and pointed at me. Not a threatening gesture, an invitation. I knew then that running was over. The story demanded its witness. The soil had to return to the field. I reached out with my bandaged hand and touched the cold glass. And the mirror, impossibly, felt like a door giving way. The journey back to Harvest S End was a pilgrimage into a nightmare I was now a part of. I didn't pack a bag. I just got in my car and drove, the mark on my hand, a cold compass needle pulling me north. The world outside the windshield seemed to grow quieter, the colors leaching away as I crossed the town line. The cheerful Halloween decorations on the houses looked like grimacing skulls. Every jack-o'-lantern-esque grin was a promise of the horror to come. I parked at the bottom of the hill leading to Blackfield Manor. The iron gates were open, as I knew they would be. The air was still and cold, tasting of damp earth and decay. I walked up the winding drive, my footsteps the only sound. I didn't have a flashlight. I didn't need one. The mark on my hand pulsed with a soft, sickly light, illuminating the path ahead, a personal will-o'-the-wisp leading me to my fate. The manor door was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The foyer was exactly as I remembered, the dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight, the pattern of the wilting lily, and the thorned vine repeating endlessly on the walls. It felt more vibrant now, the pattern writhing with a subtle, hidden life. It was welcoming me home. I walked towards the ballroom. I didn't hesitate. I was not a victim walking to her doom. I was a component of a machine, a necessary part returning to its place. The grand doors were closed. I laid my bandaged hand upon the wood. The cold of it seeped through the cloth, a familiar, intimate chill. The doors swung open silently. The ballroom was not empty. The children were there, the ones with the sackcloth faces and stitched-on smiles. They stood perfectly still in the moonlight, flanking the tall figure at the far end of the room. It was waiting for me. The vortex of its face swirled slowly, and in its depths I saw them all Jordan-S terror, Gwendolyn-S ecstatic surrender, Jonah's-S love and despair. They were all still in there, their essences preserved in its endless hunger. It glided forward, the whispers rising to a soft, chattering crescendo. It stopped a few feet from me. The soil returns. The voices hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. I unwrapped the bandage from my hand, letting the soiled cloth fall to the floor. The mark was no longer a faint pattern. It was black and vivid, the lily fully rotted, the thorns digging deep. It was no longer just on my skin. It felt like it was gripping the bone. The thing reached out, not to take me, but to touch the mark. Its fingers were long and cold, composed of solidified shadow. As they made contact, a shockwave of memory and emotion slammed into me. I felt Jordan-S final, suffocating panic. I smelled the ozone from Jonah's S shattered equipment. I saw the world through Gwendolyn-S eyes as the darkness consumed her. I was a vessel, and I was full to bursting with their stories. The cycle completes, it whispered. The story is told, the fear is sown. It began to recede, pulling back towards the far wall, the children dissolving into patches of darkness beside it. It wasn't taking me. It had never intended to. Its purpose was served. I had carried the story. I had nurtured the terror. I had returned to bear witness, and in doing so, I had fertilized the ground for the next year's harvest. The thing faded into the wall, and the last thing I saw in the swirling void was my own face, not terrified, but serene, a quiet, knowing smile on my lips. Then it was gone. The ballroom was empty. The cold began to lift. I stood there, whole and untouched, yet fundamentally altered. I was the keeper of the story now, the guardian of the threshold. I looked at my hand. The mark was already fading, retreating back into my skin, becoming dormant once more. It would sleep inside me, a seed of next year's horror, and I would carry it, waiting for the veil to thin and the door to open once again. I turned and walked out of Blackfield Manor, not as a survivor, but as its curator. The story was safe, and I would ensure it was never forgotten. I moved into a small, rented cottage on the outskirts of Harvest S End. The townspeople, those who remembered me from that first Halloween, gave me a wide berth. They saw the quiet vacancy in my eyes and sensed the chill that followed me. I was a local oddity, the strange woman who lived alone and kept her curtains drawn tight, even on the sunniest of days. They were right to be afraid. My life became a quiet, somber preparation. I spent my days reading, walking the woods, and tending a small, barren patch of earth in the backyard where nothing would grow. I was tending myself. I was the garden, and the thing in the manor was the sun and the rain. My memories were the nutrients. I would sit for hours, replaying every second of that night, sharpening the terror, polishing the despair, ensuring the story remained potent and alive within me. It was my duty. The next Halloween, I did not wait for the pull. I felt it, a deep, resonant thrum in my blood as the day approached, but I was already prepared. When the sun set on October 31st, I was standing in the foyer of Blackfield Manor. I watched as the shadows deepened and the whispers began to stir from the walls. I did not flinch when the children formed from the patches of darkness. I simply observed, a silent, willing witness. The thing appeared in the ballroom, and this time it was not alone. Flickering beside it were the shades of Jordan, Gwendolyn, and Jonas. They were not suffering. They were simply parts of the story now, actors in a perpetual play. The thing S void face turned to me, and I felt a wave of acknowledgement, a creator S pride in its most dedicated patron. I stood there until the first light of dawn began to gray the windows. As the veil thickened, the apparitions faded. The manor returned to its silent, dusty state. I walked out, the cycle complete for another year. The mark on my hand, which had begun to darken weeks before, was once again a faint, dormant pattern. This became my life. The curator, the storyteller, the soil. Years turned. The world outside changed, but Harvest S End and Blackfield Manor remained, and I remained with them. I saw new faces appear in the town, and sometimes I saw the old recognition in the eyes of a visitor who had heard the legends. I would simply look at them, my gaze steady, and they would quickly turn away, a shiver running down their spine. They felt the story, even if they didn't know it. One evening, nearly a decade after my first visit, I was in my cottage when a sharp, insistent knocking came at my door. I opened it to find a young woman standing there, her face pale but determined. She held a digital recorder in one hand and a copy of an old, obscure blog post about Blackfield Manor in the other. Her eyes were bright with the same foolish, beautiful curiosity that had once been mine. "Lena," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Sarah. I read about what happened to your friends. I think I know what S in that house. I am going there tonight. I thought you should know." I looked at her, at the vibrant life in her eyes, at the fearless quest for truth that would be her undoing. And I felt the seed inside me stir, the mark on my hand warming with a dreadful anticipation. I looked past her, towards the manor on the hill, and I knew the story was hungry for a new character. I stepped back from the door, holding it open for her. A faint, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in years. "Come in," I said. "Let me tell you what really happened." The words felt like stones dropping from my mouth, heavy and final. She hesitated on the threshold, a flicker of uncertainty in her brave eyes, but the lure of the story was too strong. She stepped inside. The air in my cottage was always cool, but as she crossed the sill, the temperature seemed to drop another few degrees. She didn't seem to notice, or she attributed it to the old building S drafts. I gestured for her to sit in the worn armchair by the cold fireplace. I took the seat opposite, my own chair positioned so the fading light from the window wouldn't touch me. I watched her set up her recorder, her movements eager and nervous. She was so young. "Start from the beginning," she said, clicking the recorder on. "Tell me everything." So I did. I didn't tell her the sanitized version from the police report. I told her the true story. I spoke of the way the dust motes looked like falling stars in the beam of a flashlight, of the specific scent of dry rot and old regrets. I described the sound of the children's laughter, not as a joyful noise, but as the scraping of branches on a window pane. I gave her Jonah's theories about residual energy, and I gave her Gwendolyn's fervent belief in the old gods of the harvest. I held nothing back. I was tilling the soil, and her mind was the new earth. As I spoke, I saw it happen. The initial skepticism was replaced by a dawning horror, and then a terrible, captivating fascination. She was being woven into the narrative, just as I had been. The mark on my palm, hidden in my lap, began to prickle with a gentle, insistent heat. It was pleased. When I finished, the room was deep in twilight. Sarah sat perfectly still, the recorder's red light a single, accusing eye in the dimness. "It's real," she whispered, not a question, but a confirmation. "It is hungrier than it has been in a long time," I replied, my voice flat. "It prefers a fresh audience." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I have to see. I have to go." I didn't try to stop her. I simply watched as she gathered her things, her movements now charged with a frantic energy. She was already under its spell. At the door, she turned back to me. "Aren't you coming?" I shook my head slowly. "My part is done. I am the prologue. You are the next chapter." She left, the door closing softly behind her. I sat in the growing dark for a long time, feeling the familiar, cold anticipation settle in the room. I was the gatekeeper, and I had just opened the gate. Later, I would walk to the manor and take my place in the foyer, a silent spectator to the new horror unfolding in the ballroom. I would watch as Sarah met the children and faced the thing with the void for a face. I would feel her terror, her confusion, her final, crushing realization, and I would absorb it all. Her story would become part of mine, a new layer of fertilizer for the seed I carried. The cycle would continue. The story would live on. The silence she left behind was heavier than any I had known. It was a waiting silence. I rose from my chair and went to the window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to see the lights of the town below and the dark, brooding shape of the manor on the hill. A single, bobbing flashlight beam was making its way up the overgrown path. Sarah. She was so bright, so full of questions. Soon, she would be full of answers, the kind that break you. I did not wait long. A pull stronger and more specific than the general call of the season drew me from the cottage. I walked the familiar path through the woods, my feet knowing the way without light. The manor door was open for her, and I slipped inside after, a ghost in my own story. I could hear her ahead, her footsteps hesitant on the rotten floorboards, her breath coming in quick, audible puffs that clouded in the frigid air. She was in the ballroom. I positioned myself in the shadows of the foyer, a perfect vantage point through the open doors. I saw her standing in the center of the room, her recorder held out like a talisman, its little red light a futile beacon against the swallowing dark. Then the children came. They formed from the patches of deeper shadow, their sackcloth faces turning towards her. She gasped, and the sound was a beautiful, terrible music. The thing emerged from the far wall, its form coalescing from the very essence of the place. The whispers rose, and this time I could distinguish a new thread being woven into the chorus, the high, thin sound of Sarah's fear. It approached her, and she stood her ground, a brave, foolish girl. She started asking it questions, her voice shaking. "What are you? What do you want?" The thing simply extended a hand of shifting darkness towards her face, not to touch her, but to show her. The ballroom seemed to dissolve around her, and I knew she was seeing it all my story, the stories of the others, a cascading waterfall of Halloween's past. She was learning the history of her own doom. She screamed then, a raw, ragged sound that was the antithesis of her earlier curiosity. It was the sound of understanding. The thing absorbed the sound, and I felt the vibration of it through the mark on my hand, a sweet, sharp pain. It was feeding, and I was the conduit. I watched as the darkness closed around her. She didn't struggle. She was paralyzed by the sheer weight of the narrative she had willingly entered. Her form became indistinct, a smudge of light being blotted out by an infinite ink. Then she was gone. The recorder clattered to the floor, its red light blinking once before dying. The thing turned its void face towards me in the foyer. For a moment, I saw Sarah's face in the swirling darkness, her mouth open in that final, silent scream. And then it was gone, replaced by my own serene reflection. An acknowledgement passed between us, a craftsman and his tool. Then it faded, and the children with it. The ballroom was empty. I walked forward and picked up the dead recorder. I pocketed it, a new artifact for my collection. As I walked back to my cottage in the pre-dawn gray, I felt sated. The story was richer now, more nuanced. Sarah's vibrant terror had been a particularly fine vintage. The mark on my hand was quiet, dormant, its hunger temporarily abated. I unlocked my door and stepped inside, back into my role as the keeper of the quiet, the guardian of the gate. I knew it would not be long before another curious soul came knocking, drawn by the legend. And I would be waiting, ready to tell the story once more. The following spring, a manila envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of Sarah. Sarah laughing with friends, Sarah on a hiking trip, Sarah blowing out candles on a birthday cake. There was a note, written in a precise, unfamiliar hand. It read, "She was loved. She is missed. We know you were the last to see her." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, a sensation different from the manor's chill. This was a human coldness, born of grief and suspicion. I had grown so accustomed to my role as a channel for the supernatural that I had forgotten, the mundane persistence of the living. I tucked the photographs into a drawer, already filled with similar artifacts. Jordan missing person S flyer, a newspaper clipping about Gwendolyn S family offering a reward, a faded picture of Jonah's that had fallen from his wallet. I did not look at them. They were simply part of the archive. The man who came was named David. He was Sarah S. father. He found me in my backyard, staring at the barren patch of earth. He was a large man, his face etched with lines of sorrow and anger. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You told her stories, he said, his voice low and rough. You filled her head with that nonsense and sent her up there. I turned to face him. The sun was behind him, casting his face in shadow. I told her the truth, I replied. She chose to seek it for herself. Your truth is a poison, he spat. He took a step closer, and I could see the raw pain in his eyes. It was a vibrant, potent thing. I am going up there. I am going to tear that place down, board by board, until I find something. Until I find her. A strange, quiet thrill went through me. This was new. This was not the wide-eyed curiosity of a seeker of truths. This was the furious, destructive love of a parent. The story was evolving. You cannot tear it down, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The house is not just wood and stone. We LLC, he said, and turned on his heel, marching back towards the road. His purpose a solid, tangible force. That night, I felt the Manor S agitation. The mark on my hand itched and burned, not with its usual dormant warmth, but with a sharp, anxious energy. David was a variable it had not accounted for. His grief was not food, it was a threat. When I arrived at the manor, the air was thick with a defensive static. The whispers were a frantic, overlapping hiss. The children were not playing. They were standing guard at the ballroom doors, their stitched smiles seeming like grimaces of warning. David came at midnight with a sledgehammer and a gasoline can. I watched from the tree line as he battered the front door, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the still night. He was shouting Sarah S. name, a raw, desperate incantation. He forced his way inside. The manor reacted. It did not try to show him its history or seduce him with its story. It fought back. The floorboards in the foyer buckled under his feet. The walls seemed to press in on him. I heard his shouts turn from anger to confusion, then to fear. He had come to destroy a place, but the place was fighting back, and it was a fight he could not win. He stumbled into the ballroom, and I moved to the doorway to watch. The thing was there, but it was different. It was larger, more solid, its void face churning like a storm. It did not invite or explain. It simply advanced on him, a wave of absolute negation. David swung his sledgehammer, but it passed through the form without resistance. The darkness enveloped him. His scream was cut short, swallowed whole. The silence that followed was profound. The manor had defended itself. It had consumed a new kind of fear, not the terror of the curious, but the primal fear of the protector who has failed. The thing in the ballroom turned to me, and for a fleeting second, I saw David's face, not screaming, but weeping, etched into the void before it dissolved. I returned to my cottage as the sun rose. The mark on my hand was calm again, but I knew the story had changed forever. It was no longer just a passive trap for the willing. It was an active, defensive entity, and I had a new role to play. I was not just the curator of the legend. I was the guardian of the gate, the first line of defense against those who would seek to break the cycle. I looked out the window towards the seemingly peaceful manor and knew that the next knock on my door would not be from a seeker, but from another mourner. And I would have a new story to tell them, a story of a grief so strong it tried to fight the dark and lost. The first of the new mourners was a woman named Elise, Sarah's mother. She came alone, her face a mask of quiet devastation, so different from her husband's fiery anger. She didn't bring accusations or threats. She brought a small porcelain teacup, painted with forget-me-nots. This was Sarah's favorite, she said, her voice hollow as she held it out to me on my doorstep. She always said it made the tea taste better. I thought you should have it. I took the cup. It was warm from her hands. It was a different kind of artifact, not a record of a life, but a piece of its heart. I felt a strange, unfamiliar pang, a sensation so deeply buried, I barely recognized it as pity. He's gone too, isn't he? She asked, though she already knew the answer. They are together in the story, I said, the words feeling inadequate even as I spoke them. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the powder on her cheek. Then the story is all I have left. She turned and walked away, a lonely figure dissolving into the mist of the harvest's end morning. I placed the teacup on the mantelpiece, a stark, delicate contrast to the other grim relics. It was a reminder that the threads I gathered were not just threads of fear, but of love, of birthdays, and favorite cups of tea. The story was becoming more complex, its tapestry richer and more terrible. The manor felt it too. On my next visits, I noticed subtle changes. The whispers sometimes carried the faint, echoing cadence of David's furious shouts. The children's games occasionally included a new, grim participant, a shadow, that swung a phantom sledgehammer at the walls before being absorbed back into the gloom. The thing itself seemed more substantial, its presence denser, as if fortified by the consumption of such potent, opposing emotions. My role shifted accordingly. I began to take a more active hand in the narrative. When a team of paranormal investigators, armed with blinking electronic devices, arrived from the city, I did not wait for them to come to me. I met them at the edge of the property. I told them a carefully edited version of the story, one designed to appeal to their scientific skepticism and their hidden desire for proof. I spoke of electromagnetic fluctuations and cold spots, of residual hauntings and intelligent phenomena. I saw the same light in their eyes that I had once seen in Sarah's. I led them to the door and watched them enter, their confidence a flimsy shield. The manor consumed their empirical data and replaced it with primal screams, which I dutifully absorbed as I stood in my usual spot. I was no longer just a curator or a guardian. I was a shepherd, guiding the flock to the slaughter. The townspeople's fear of me deepened into something closer to awe. They left offerings on my porch, sometimes a loaf of bread, a jar of preserves, superstitious tokens to ward off the attention of the thing on the hill and its quiet priestess. I accepted them all. It was part of the balance. Years folded into one another. The world outside became louder, more connected, but Harvest's end remained a quiet pocket of shadow, and Blackfield Manor a secret that the digital age could not quite illuminate. My hair began to show threads of silver, but the mark on my hand remained as dark and clear as the day it was given. I was aging, but the story was ageless, and it was keeping me tethered. Then, on a crisp autumn day, a different kind of visitor arrived. He was an old man, leaning heavily on a cane, his back stooped, but his eyes sharp and clear. He did not look afraid or curious. He looked resolved. He walked up my path with a slow, deliberate gait and knocked on my door with the head of his cane. I opened it and felt a jolt of recognition, though I had never seen him before. He had Jonah's eyes. "You knew my son," he said. It wasn't a question. I simply nodded, stepping back to let him in. He moved past me, his gaze taking in the sparse room, the drawn curtains, the mantelpiece with its collection of sorrows. His eyes lingered on the porcelain teacup. He was always chasing shadows, the old man said, lowering himself into the armchair with a grunt. I told him it was a fool's errand, but he was my fool. I sat opposite him, the silence stretching between us. This was not a seeker or a mourner. This was a historian of a different sort. "I am dying," he stated plainly. "And before I go, I want to know, not the how or the why. I want to know if he is at peace." I looked at him, at the fierce, paternal love that had outlasted a decade of grief. I thought of Jonah's, now a permanent part of the thing in the ballroom, his theories and his fears woven into the very fabric of the horror. There was no peace there, only existence. "He is part of something eternal," I said, choosing my words with more care than I had in years. The old man studied my face for a long time, his own a landscape of wrinkles and sorrow. He saw the vacancy in my eyes, the chill that clung to me. He saw the truth. He nodded slowly, a deep, weary acceptance settling over him. "Then it's not over," he said. "It just continues." "It continues," I echoed. He pushed himself up from the chair, his joints cracking. He gave me one last, long look, then turned and left without another word. I watched him go, a solitary figure making his way down the lane. He did not look towards the manor. He already knew everything he needed to know. That night, the mark on my hand burned with a soft, steady light as I walked to Blackfield Manor. I took my place in the foyer, and as the children formed and the whispers began, I saw a new shade flicker beside Jonah's. It was the old man, not afraid, but serene, his hand resting on his son's spectral shoulder. He had not come as a victim or a threat. He had come as a part of the story, a final, gentle punctuation to his son's chapter. The thing in the ballroom seemed to regard this new addition with a sort of quiet respect. I stood there until dawn, the curator, the guardian, the shepherd, watching the eternal story unfold. And I knew, with a certainty that was as deep as the foundations of the manor itself, that I would be here, waiting for all the stories yet to come. Story 3. The wind began first, as it often did in the ruins of October. It was not a gentle breeze, but a low, persistent whisper that slid through the skeletal remains of suburbia, stirring the dust of shattered brick and the ghosts of dead leaves. It carried the scent of things long forgotten, cold concrete, damp earth, and beneath it all, the faint, sweet promise of decay. It moved through the streets of this graveyard of a town, a place whose name no longer mattered, slipping through the broken windows of houses that stood like skulls with empty eye sockets. It was a wind that seemed to speak, not in words, but in sensations, a chill foretelling that threaded its way through the silence, carrying a single, unspoken message on its breath. It is almost time. Brent felt it as he stood watch at the mouth of the old library, his back against the cold stone. He pulled his worn coat tighter, the frayed collar scratching at his neck. The air had changed. It was the thinning of the world, the slow seep of a deeper cold that had nothing to do with the approaching winter. He looked down the main street, a canyon of crumbling facades, and saw the proof of it everywhere. Halloween was coming to a dead world, and the dead were preparing to receive it. Pumpkins, or what was left of them, sat rotting on porches, their carved grins sagging into leering, liquefied screams. They were from before, of course, left to the elements for years. Yet each autumn they seemed to briefly resurrect their horrible mirth, their waxy flesh collapsing in on itself like the faces of the damned. Tattered ghosts of synthetic cobwebs fluttered from rusted gutters, and here and there a plastic skeleton, bleached and brittle by sun and radiation, dangled from a lamppost, its pose less humorous and more like a final, desperate act of contortion. The town was permanently dressed for its own funeral, and the countdown to the 31st was a drumbeat only a few could hear. Inside the library, in the hushed sanctuary of the reference section, the girl, Anna, was drawing in the dust on a low table. She was 9, maybe 10, her age a guesswork of malnutrition and trauma. Her hair was the color of wheat stored in a dark place, and her eyes were too old for her face. She did not speak of the world before. She had been an infant when the skies turned to fire. But she remembered things, not in her mind, but in her blood. She remembered the taste of candy corn, the weight of a full treat bucket, the safe, thrilling fear of a darkened street, lit only by the friendly glow of jack-o'-lanterns. she drew those pumpkins in the dust, their triangular eyes and jagged smiles. As her finger traced the lines, a faint, warm orange light seemed to pulse from the center of her drawings, a tiny, contained sun against the gray. This was her gift. It was a small thing, a flicker of something that was not quite life and not quite memory, but a resonance. She could make the echoes of the past hum, could sometimes pull whispers of what was into the bleakness of what is. Brent watched her from the doorway, his heart a tight, painful knot in his chest. He was not her father, but he was all she had. He was a man built from scar tissue and resolve, his hands more accustomed to the weight of a rifle than the softness of a child's hand. He had found her 3 years ago, holed up in a supermarket, sitting cross-legged in a circle of canned goods that had not been touched by the looters, as if she were holding court. She had looked at him, not with fear, but with a quiet recognition, and had offered him a rusted can of peaches. He had been protecting her ever since. She was a spark in an endless night, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him more than the October wind, that there were those who would seek to extinguish that spark, or worse, use it to burn the world down all over again. The wind carried the sound of footsteps, cautious and shuffling. Brent tensed, his hand going to the knife at his belt. A figure emerged from behind a gutted school bus, a man wrapped in layers of filthy cloth, his face hidden by a makeshift mask of stitched-together leather. It was one of the wanderers, the lost souls who drifted between enclaves, trading scraps of information and tinned food. The corn the man rasped, his voice like dry leaves crushed underfoot. Out by the old Henderson farm, it moving. Brent said nothing, just stared, his silence a wall. The wanderer's eyes, visible through slits in the mask, darted nervously. They say a man went in, a big man from the south. He had followers. They call him the Harvest King. He shivered, though the cold was not that deep yet. He looking for something. For a child, they say. A child who can make the old lights glow. Brent's blood went still in his veins. He tossed the man a dented can of beans from his pack. The wanderer caught it and scurried back into the ruins, swallowed by the gathering twilight. The Harvest King. Brent had heard the name, a rumor on the poisoned air. His real name was Gaston, a former history professor who had found his true calling in the apocalypse. He preached a gospel of purification through darkness, of embracing the end as a new beginning. He believed the old holidays were power, focal points, where the weakened fabric of reality could be torn. And Halloween, the night when the veil was thinnest, was the most powerful of all. That night, Brent dreamed. He was carving a pumpkin, a massive, perfectly ripe one. His knife slid through the thick flesh, but instead of pulp and seeds, a black, viscous fluid oozed out, smelling of ozone and opened earth. He carved the eyes, and they were Anna's eyes, wide and terrified. He carved the mouth, a wide, screaming gash, and from it poured not light, but a profound, swallowing darkness. He woke with a start, the taste of copper in his mouth. the sound of the wind, a mocking laugh against the library's walls. The next day, the 29th, they ventured out for supplies. The world was painted in the colors of decay. Crimson and burnt orange leaves skittering across the asphalt, the bruised purple of the sky threatening an early dusk. They passed a house where a lone scarecrow stood sentinel in a front yard that had become a field of desiccated cornstalks. Its head was a burlap sack, its features drawn on with what looked like old, dried blood. As they passed, Brent could have sworn its stitched smile widened, and its head, just slightly, turned to watch them go. Anna stopped, her small hand tightening in his. She was looking at a pile of leaves gathered against a chain-link fence. They were swirling, not from the wind, but in a slow, deliberate vortex. In the center of the spiral, for just a moment, the leaves formed a face, hollow-eyed and shrieking, before collapsing back into randomness. "They ray waking up," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The things that used to just be pretend." Brent pulled her along, his pace quickening. He could feel it too. The town was no longer just a collection of ruins. It was becoming a stage, and the set dressing of 1,000 forgotten Halloweens was stirring, imbued with a new and terrible purpose. They found a house that had been picked clean long ago, but in the basement, behind a collapsed shelf, Brent discovered a small, sealed cardboard box. It was damp, but the contents were preserved. He pried it open. Inside were Halloween decorations: a rubber bat with crinkled wings, a string of orange and black lights, the wire brittle, and at the bottom, nestled in yellowed tissue paper, a child's costume. It was a witch, a cheap, mass-produced thing of black polyester, with a pointed hat and a plastic mask. Anna reached for the mask. It was the face of a cartoon witch, with a warty nose and a wide, green grin. She held it, her fingers tracing the empty eye holes. "Dante," Brent said, a sudden, irrational fear seizing him. But Anna, with a look of profound sadness, brought the mask to her face. She did not put it on, just held it there, against her cheek. "It's so lonely," she murmured. "It's been waiting in the dark for so long to be someone." That was her gift, and her curse. She didn't just remember the joy. She felt the echoes of all the emotions poured into these objects: the excitement, the fear, the cheap thrills, and the ancient, pagan dread that the holiday could never quite bury. She was a tuning fork for the residual energy of the world that was. And on the eve of Halloween, in a world stripped bare, that energy was becoming a deafening roar. On the 30th, the fog came. It was not the gentle mist of autumn mornings, but a thick, soupy blanket that rolled in from the river and clung to the ruins, muffling sound and distorting shapes. It was a liminal space made physical, a world between worlds. Sounds traveled strangely in the fog. They heard what sounded like children laughing, but the laughter was too high, too sharp, and had no source. Once, a doorbell chimed, clear and electronic, from a house that had no power for a decade. It was in this fog that they saw the first of them. A group of figures, moving silently down the center of the street. They were tall and gaunt, wearing costumes that were not from any store. One was draped in what looked like stitched-together shadows. Another wore a mask of dried, cracked mud that seemed to weep. They did not speak or look around. They simply processed, like a funeral march for a forgotten god. At their head was a man who could only be Gaston. He was not a large man, but he carried a presence that seemed to push the fog back. He wore a suit of dark, elegant wool, impossibly clean and whole, and over his face he wore no mask. His features were sharp and intelligent, but his eyes were the color of a late October sky, empty and vast. In his hand, he carried a staff topped with a large, blackened sunflower, its head bowed as if in mourning. He stopped, and his procession stopped with him. He turned his head, and his gaze swept over the library, though Brent and Anna were hidden deep within its shadows. He smiled, a thin, bloodless line. "The offering must be made," Gaston said, his voice calm and carrying, a professor lecturing to an empty hall. "The harvest requires a reaping. The old ones are hungry." Then he moved on, his silent followers flowing behind him like a river of darkness, swallowed by the fog. Brent's breath caught in his throat. The offering, the child. He looked at Anna, who was trembling, her small body vibrating like a plucked string. She was not just a beacon of hope. She was the final, perfect sacrifice for a new, dark age. Halloween night arrived not with a bang, but with a deepening of the silence. The wind died completely. The fog thickened, glowing with a sickly orange light from a moon that was not visible. A great, rotten pumpkin hanging in the sky. The air grew cold, a damp, penetrating chill that settled in the bones and promised never to leave. Brent had barred the library doors and windows as best he could, but he knew it was futile. This was not a battle that could be won with barricades. This was a battle of symbols, of belief, of the thin, permeable membrane between what is and what might be. Anna sat in the center of the main reading room, the witch mask on the floor beside her. She had taken the string of orange and black lights and was holding the plug in her hand. She closed her eyes. A soft, warm light began to emanate from her, pushing back the oppressive gloom. It was the light of 100 remembered hearths, 1,000 smiling jack-o'-lanterns, the safe, electric glow of streetlights on a night of sanctioned fear. Outside, the silence was broken. It started as a rustle, the sound of countless dry leaves skittering across pavement. Then came the soft, hollow thumps of pumpkins, the real ones, and the stone-carved memories of them, rolling from porches and into the streets. The plastic skeletons twitched on their strings, their bony fingers clacking a skeletal rhythm. The scarecrows stepped down from their posts, their burlap heads turning slowly, their painted eyes seeking. They were coming. Brent stood at the door, his rifle in his hands, a pathetic gesture against the tide of resurrected tradition. He peered through a crack in the boards. The street was filled with them. The costumed figures from the fog were there, now joined by the things Anna S. gift had unwittingly awakened. A ghost made of a real bedsheet floated past, but beneath it there was a palpable, shifting form, a group of children in vintage costumes, a pirate, a ballerina. A cowboy stood perfectly still, their plastic masks reflecting no light, their tiny hands clutching empty treat bags, and at the head of it all stood Gaston, the Harvest King. He had carved a pumpkin, a real, fresh one that should not exist. He held it in his hands, and its light was not orange, but a deep, bloody crimson. The veil is thin, Gaston intoned, his voice now amplified, echoing through the canyons of the dead town. The time for play is over. The time for the true harvest is now. Give us the child. She is the last candle. We will use her light to see our way into the forever dark. The library doors began to shake, not from force, but from the pressure of the silence outside, a silence that was somehow heavy and alive. The boards groaned. Brent raised his rifle, his knuckles white, knowing it was useless. Then Anna stood up. Her own light was brighter now, a pure golden white. She walked to the door and placed her small hand against the wood. "No," she said, and her voice was not a child's voice. It was the voice of every child who had ever laughed on Halloween, the collective memory of a million trick-or-treats ringing through the decades. She turned to Brent, her eyes full of a sorrowful understanding. "Yes, right. The veil is thin. I can see through it. I can see all the way back." She looked at the witch mask on the floor. A mask is a door. A candle is a key. Before Brent could stop her, she picked up the mask and put it on. The change was instantaneous. The cheap plastic seemed to melt and reform, becoming ancient, pitted wood and dried leather. The cartoonish grin became a rictus of genuine malice. The polyester costume she wore flowed and darkened, becoming robes of shadow and earth. Her small form seemed to grow, not in size, but in presence, drawing power from the very atmosphere of the night. When she spoke, her voice was a chorus of whispers, the rustle of leaves, the crackle of a fire, the sigh of the grave. "You seek a harvest, Gaston. Then you shall have one." She raised her hands, and the library doors blew outward, not in a shower of splinters, but dissolving into motes of dust that joined the fog. The horde of awakened horrors outside recoiled, not from light, but from a new, more potent darkness that flowed from Anna. Gaston's smug certainty faltered. This was not the passive sacrifice he had envisioned. This was a power older than his, a power born from the true, untamed heart of Samhain, from the time when this night was not about candy, but about appeasing the spirits that walked. "The old ones are with me," Gaston insisted, holding up his bloody jack-o'-lantern. "No, the thing that was Anna whispered. They are with the night, and I am the night's daughter now." She gestured, and the scarecrows turned on Gaston's followers. The costumed figures in their stitched-together shadows found their own shadows coming alive, strangling them with tendrils of pure black. The pumpkin in Gaston S. hands rotted in an instant, collapsing into a putrid slurry that dripped through his fingers. The crimson light died. The Harvest King screamed, a sound of pure, undiluted rage. He lunged forward, his staff raised like a weapon. But Anna, or the ancient force wearing her shape, simply looked at him. The plastic skeleton on the lamppost above him broke its string and dropped, wrapping its brittle limbs around him in a brittle, final embrace. They fell to the ground together, and the earth beneath them seemed to open, a mouth of soil and stone, and swallowed them whole. The silence that followed was absolute. The other horrors, their purpose lost, began to fade. The costumed children dissolved into puffs of dust. The scarecrows staggered back to their posts and grew still. The ghosts settled back into their sheets, now just cloth. Brent stared, his mind refusing to process what he had seen. The street was empty again, save for the drifting fog. In the center of it stood Anna. She slowly reached up and removed the mask. It was just cheap plastic once more. She dropped it to the ground, where it cracked in two. She looked at Brent, and her eyes were her own again, but filled with an infinite, weary knowledge. She was still a child, but she had opened a door within herself to win the battle, and she could not fully close it. "It is over," Brent said, his voice hoarse. Anna shook her head, a slow, sad movement. She pointed to the sky. The orange, malevolent moon was still there. The fog had not lifted. The cold had not abated. "It is never over," she whispered. "The veil is still thin. It will always be thin here. I have to stay, to keep the door from opening too wide." Brent understood then. She had not defeated the darkness. She had become its warden. She had harnessed the power of Halloween itself, and in doing so, had bound herself to it. She was the new guardian of the threshold, the spirit of this dead place, a lonely little girl forever presiding over a ghost town's eternal Halloween. He tried to go to her to take her hand, but the space between them seemed to stretch, to become vast and uncrossable. She was already receding, becoming part of the library, the street, the fog. The images began to blur. Brent's figure grew hazy, his outline softening into the gray of the ruins. The library melted into the mist, its solid form dissolving into memory. The last thing he saw was Anna, not as a girl, but as a small, steady flame in the heart of a grate, encompassing darkness, a single, unwavering candle in a jack-o'-lantern that was the world itself. The orange glow pulsed once, softly, like a heartbeat. Then, like a dream upon waking, it all faded, until there was nothing left but the wind, and the whispering leaves, and the long, cold night. He stood for a long time, staring at the space where she had been. The wind picked up, biting through his jacket, but the cold he felt was from the inside. He was alone, truly alone, for the first time since he had found her offering him peaches in that broken kitchen. The silence was a physical weight. He did not know how long he stood there before he turned and walked away. There was no direction, no purpose. He was a ghost himself now, untethered. He walked past the silent scarecrows, past the houses with their dark, empty windows. They were just houses again. The magic, the terrible, waking magic, had gone out of them. It had all gone into her. Days bled into one another. He scavenged out of habit, eating without tasting, sleeping without dreaming. The world was gray and flat. He avoided the library, giving it a wide berth, a sacred grave he could not bear to look upon. But the town itself seemed smaller now, its borders defined by the reach of her influence. He could feel it if he walked too far east, a subtle pressure, a warning in the air that turned him back. He was her first and only subject, a king in a prison of her making. One evening, nearly a week after Halloween, he found a single, perfect apple on the steps of a collapsed post office. It was red and unblemished, a fruit that had no right to exist. He picked it up. It was cold and smooth in his hand. He knew it was from her. A message. A reminder that she was still there, still tending her garden in the dark. He took a bite. It was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. He would find things left for him in his path. A can of fuel that hadn't gone bad. A warm blanket folded neatly on a park bench. A book, its pages miraculously dry. He was being provided for, cared for by the spirit of the place. He was living inside her, and she was keeping him alive. When the first snow fell, it was different. It was soft and quiet, muting the ruins in a blanket of white. It felt clean, a reset. He was standing at the edge of the town square, watching the flakes drift down, when he saw the children. They were not real children. They were faint, shimmering impressions, like heat haze given form. A little boy in a snowsuit, rolling a ball of snow. Two girls, their spectral forms weaving through the falling flakes in a silent game of tag. They were echoes, memories of winters past that she was allowing to play, just for a little while. He understood then the full scope of her burden and her power. She wasn't just holding back the dark. She was curating the light, the memories, the echoes of all that had been lost. She was keeping the town alive in the only way she could, a museum of ghosts sustained by her own bright spark. That night, he built a small fire in a rusted barrel, using wood he had gathered. He sat before it, the apple core in his hand. He looked toward the library, a dark shape in the distance, and for the first time, he didn't feel a crushing loss. He felt a purpose. He was not her prisoner. He was her witness. He was the one who remembered the girl she had been, and in remembering, he anchored her to that part of herself. He was the keeper of her memory, just as she was the keeper of the town's. The snow continued to fall, covering the scars of the world, and Brent finally slept, a deep, dreamless sleep. Outside, the ghost children played in the silent, falling snow, their laughter a sound only the heart could hear, a gift from the little witch in the library, who watched over them all. He woke to a world remade in white. The usual sounds of scavenging crows and creaking metal were absent, swallowed by the snow's deep hush. The air was sharp and clean, scoured of the lingering scent of decay and damp that had haunted the town for years. It was as if Anna had not only pushed back the dark, but had laundered the very air. He found a new gift that morning, placed carefully on the stump he used as a chopping block. It was a pair of sturdy leather gloves, the leather supple and new. He pulled them on. They fit perfectly. He looked in the direction of the library and nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture of thanks. The connection was a thin, taut wire between them, a line of acknowledgement that required no words. As the days shortened toward the solstice, the offerings became more intricate. He found a fir tree, its branches perfectly shaped, leaning against the wall of the house he declaimed as his own. Over the next few days, boxes of old, delicate glass ornaments appeared, along with a string of lights that, when he plugged them into his jury-rigged battery, glowed with a soft, multicolored warmth. He understood the instruction. He spent a day carefully hanging each bauble, each silver icicle. When he was finished, he stood back and looked at the tree, standing in the ruin of his living room, its lights pushing back the deep winter gloom. It was a pocket of defiant, beautiful life. That night he heard music. It was faint, a ghost of a melody carried on the frozen air, a Christmas carol. He followed the sound, his boots crunching in the snow, until he stood in the town square. The spectral children were there, but they were different. Their forms were clearer, their edges defined by a soft, internal light. They were singing, their mouths opening and closing in silent harmony, while around them, the ghosts of their parents stood watching, their faces holding the echoes of smiles. Anna was giving them Christmas. He did not join them. He was the audience for this performance, the sole living witness to her miracle. He watched until the silent song ended and the figures began to fade, their light dissolving back into the starlit snow. As they vanished, one of the child-shaped lights turned and looked directly at him. It was not Anna, but it was filled with her attention. It raised a faint, glowing hand in a wave before blinking out of existence. The seasons turned in their strange, accelerated way within the borders of her realm. The snows melted, revealing not mud and debris, but the first green shoots of crocuses and daffodils pushing through the soil in neat, organized patches. The air grew warm, and the sound of bees, long absent from the world, returned as a drowsy hum. She was rebuilding, not the structures, but the soul of the place, season by remembered season. He found himself working, not just surviving. He tilled a small plot of earth where she made the soil rich and dark, and he planted seeds he found in neatly labeled packets on his doorstep. Beans, carrots, tomatoes. They grew with an impossible vigor, producing vegetables that were bursting with flavor. He was no longer a scavenger, but a groundskeeper, a caretaker. One evening in what felt like high summer, he was weeding the garden when a shadow fell over him. He looked up, his heart seizing for a moment, expecting Gaston or some new horror. But it was Anna. She was solid, more real than the ghost children, but but she was not the same girl. Her eyes were still too old, and a faint, golden light seemed to cling to her skin like pollen. She held out her hand. In her palm was a single, ripe peach. "It is time for you to go, Brent," she said. Her voice was her own, but it had the same layered quality as the thing that had spoken through the mask, as if she were speaking from a great distance. He stared at the peach, then at her. "Go, where? This is my home." "It is my home," she corrected gently, not with cruelty, but with the finality of a stone settling into place. "You are alive. You are of the world that moves forward. I am of the world that stands still. Having you here, it helps, but it also hurts. It reminds me of what I am not." Tears he didn't know he had left welled in his eyes. "I don't want to leave you alone." "I am not alone," she said, and gestured around them. The air shimmered, and for a breathtaking second, the town was not a ruin. The houses were whole, with fresh paint and flowering gardens. The ghosts of the townspeople were there, solid and smiling, walking dogs that panted happily, calling to each other in silent, cheerful conversation. It was a perfect, preserved memory, a diorama of a life that was gone. "They are with me. I am with them. But you have a different path. You have remembered me long enough. Now you need to remember yourself." She pressed the peach into his hand. Its skin was warm and soft. "Take the road east," she instructed. "The way will be clear. The world beyond my borders is still broken, but it is not dead. There are others. You will find them." He knew she was right. The protective pressure that had always turned him back was gone from the eastern edge of town. She was opening the gate. The next morning, he packed a small bag with the food he had grown and the few possessions that mattered. He walked to the town limits. She was there, waiting for him by the rusted welcome sign. She looked small again, just a little girl in a clean, simple dress. "Thank you, Brent," she said, "for everything." He knelt down, so he was at her eye level. "I'll never forget you, Anna." "I know," she whispered. "That's why I can stay." He stood, turned, and walked. He did not look back. He could feel the change as he crossed the boundary. The air lost its clean, scented quality, becoming thin and sharp with dust. The vibrant green of the plants at the border gave way to the familiar gray and brown of the true wasteland. He walked for an hour. Then, unable to stop himself, he turned. The town was gone. In its place was a low, rolling hill, covered in scrub grass and wildflowers. There was no library, no houses, no streets. Just an empty, peaceful landscape under a wide, open sky. He stood there for a long time, until the sun began to dip in the west. Then he turned back to the east, to the broken road, and started walking. In his pocket, his fingers closed around the peach. It was still warm. He knew it would never rot. It was a seed of a better world, a gift from the ghost of Halloween, and he would carry it with him into whatever came next. The road was a cracked and forgotten ribbon, but he walked it with a purpose he had not felt in years. The peach in his pocket was a constant, gentle warmth against his leg, a small sun in the gray desolation. He walked for days, his shadow stretching long in the mornings and evenings. The world was silent, but the silence was different now. It was not the haunted silence of the town, but the empty silence of a place that had simply been left behind. He saw signs of others, eventually. Faint paths worn through the dust, the blackened remains of old campfires. He was careful, moving with a scavenger's old instincts, but the fear that had been his constant companion for so long was muted. He had faced the living dark and witnessed a miracle. The mundane dangers of the road held little terror for him now. One evening he saw a light. It was not a campfire, but the steady yellow glow of a lantern in a window. It came from a small, fortified farmhouse nestled in a shallow valley. He watched it for a long time from a ridge, remembering the last time he had approached a light in the darkness. That had been Gaston's fire, a lure into a trap. This felt different. It felt stubborn and honest. He decided to risk it. He walked down the slope, his hands held clear of his sides. As he neared, a door opened and a figure stepped out, silhouetted by the lantern light. A man holding a rifle, but not aiming it. Far enough, the man called out, his voice rough but not hostile. "You alone?" "Yes," Brent answered, his own voice sounding strange to him after so long without conversation. "My name is Brent. I've been walking for a long time." The man was silent for a moment, assessing him. "You look like you have," he said finally. "We don't get many travelers. Come on in." Slowly. The farmhouse was cramped, but clean, smelling of wood smoke and stew. A woman and a young boy watched him from the table, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The man introduced himself as Elias. They shared a meal of rabbit stew, and Brent told them a carefully edited version of his story. He spoke of being alone, of surviving, of wandering. He did not speak of the town, or the library, or the little girl who had swallowed a night and become its guardian. Elias nodded along. "We've held on here, a few of us. It's a hard life, but it's life." He looked at his son. "It's for him." Later, as Brent prepared to leave with their blessing and a refilled canteen, the boy approached him. He couldn't have been more than 7, with serious eyes. "You have a light in your pocket," the boy said quietly. Brent froze. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the peach. It glowed with a soft, internal luminescence, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. He had not shown it to anyone. The boy looked at it, not with greed or fear, but with a quiet reverence. "It's a good light," he whispered. "It feels like stories." Brent looked from the boy's face to the peach, and he understood. Anna's gift was not just for him. It was a seed, and it was meant to be planted. He knelt down. "His name is Brent," the boy's mother said, a gentle correction in her voice. The boy shook his head, his eyes still locked on the fruit. "No, for the peach. It has a name. It's called Hope." Brent felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. He closed his fingers around the peach, its warmth spreading through his hand. He had been her witness, and now he was to become her herald. Not by telling the story, which no one would believe, but by carrying the proof. He looked at Elias and his family, seeing not just survivors, but the future. "Would you like to help me plant it?" Brent asked the boy. The boy's eyes lit up, and he nodded vigorously. They went outside to a small, protected patch of earth near the house where Elias grew his vegetables. With his hands, Brent dug a small hole. He paused for a moment, holding the peach, feeling its vibrant, impossible life. Then he placed it in the earth and covered it with soil. He didn't know what would happen. Perhaps a tree would grow bearing fruit that held a fragment of that same golden light. Perhaps it would simply sanctify this small patch of land, making it a little safer, a little more fertile. It didn't matter. The act itself was the point. He stayed with Elias and his family for a few days, helping with chores, sharing what he knew. When he left, he turned once to look back. The farmhouse looked the same, the lantern in the window a defiant pinprick in the vast twilight. But he knew something had changed. Something had taken root. He continued east, his bag a little lighter, his heart a little fuller. The road was still long, and the world was still broken. But he was no longer just a survivor or a witness. He was a gardener, tending the small, bright things in the dark, carrying the memory of a little witch and the enduring power of a kindness that could outlast the end of everything. The next settlement he found was larger, a ragged collection of shacks and repurposed buildings huddled around a working well. They were wary, but the simple fact that he approached in daylight, empty-handed and calm, earned him a hearing. He traded labor for food, mending fences and patching roofs. He was quiet, but his hands were capable, and he did not flinch at hard work. Slowly, the suspicion around him faded into a guarded acceptance. He never spoke of Anna. The story was a precious, fragile thing he carried inside, a locket he would not open for anyone. But he found other ways to share what she had taught him. He showed them how to companion plant marigolds with the tomatoes to deter pests, a trick he had learned in his garden back in the town. He helped a woman salvage the broken pieces of a ceramic pot, patiently fitting them together with a homemade glue, creating something whole and useful from the shards. These small acts felt like a quiet prayer, a way of honoring her memory without giving it a name. Weeks turned into months. He became a part of the rhythm of the place, a steady, quiet presence. One evening, sitting by the communal fire, a young girl with a persistent cough was brought to the circle. Her breathing was a ragged, worrying sound. The community's healer had tried all her remedies, to no avail. The girl's mother held her, face etched with a despair Brent knew all too well. Without a word, Brent stood and walked to his small shelter. He returned with a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was the last thing he had saved from his garden, a sprig of mint he had carefully dried. It was not magic. It was just a plant. But it had grown in soil she had blessed. He handed it to the healer. "Make a tea," he said softly. The healer looked at the humble offering, then at Brent's earnest face. She nodded and set a pot of water to boil. They gave the girl the tea to sip, the steam carrying the sharp, clean scent of mint into the night air. Within an hour, the girl's coughing had subsided into a quiet, steady breathing. She slept, curled in her mother's lap. It was not a miracle. The mint might have helped, or the girl's own strength might have finally won through. But to the people around the fire, it felt like something more. They looked at Brent with new eyes, not as just a drifter, but as a man who carried a subtle grace with him. He left that settlement in the spring, as the first true warmth touched the land. They asked him to stay, but he knew his path was not to put down roots in one place. His purpose was to walk, to carry the echo of her peace into the broken corners of the world. He traveled for years. He never found a paradise or an easy answer. The world remained a hard, often cruel place, but he found pockets of resilience, small communities clinging to life, and in each one he left something behind. A repaired tool, a shared technique for purifying water, a story told to a child that was not about witches or ghosts, but about the simple, unyielding power of kindness. His hair grayed, and lines deepened on his face, but the warmth in his pocket never faded. He would sometimes take the peach out and hold it, its gentle light a private comfort. It never aged, never spoiled. It was a promise. One day, an old man now, he came to a place by the sea. The salt air was sharp and clean. There was a small, thriving village there, built from the wreckage of the old world, but looking toward the future. Children played on the beach, their shouts carried away by the wind. He saw a young man patiently teaching a boy how to mend a fishing net. The scene was so ordinary, so perfectly human, that it brought tears to his eyes. He found a quiet spot on a bluff overlooking the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He felt a profound tiredness, a gentle pulling in his bones. He knew his journey was over. He sat down in the soft grass, the sound of the waves a constant, soothing rhythm below. He took the peach from his pocket one last time. It glowed, brighter now, as if in recognition. He held it in his palm, feeling its familiar, life-giving warmth seep into his skin. He did not plant it. He simply held it and watched the sun dip below the horizon. As the last light faded from the sky, he felt a presence beside him. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. A small, cool hand slipped into his free one. He could feel the immense, quiet power in that touch, the weight of 1,000 remembered days and 1,000 sheltered ghosts. "You did well, Brent," Anna's voice said, soft as the twilight. "You made a garden of the road." He smiled, a deep, peaceful exhaustion settling over him. He looked at her, and she was just a girl again. The terrible light in her eyes softened into something like love. The boundary between her preserved world and his dying one dissolved in that moment. The sound of the ocean faded, replaced by the silent, falling snow of a long ago winter, and the faint, heart-heard laughter of ghost children at play. He closed his eyes. When they found his body the next morning, the old man was smiling, his face peaceful. His hands were empty. The peach was gone, but the air around him smelled faintly, impossibly, of peaches and fresh, fallen snow. The people of the seaside village buried him on the bluff, as he had been found. They marked the spot with a simple stone, though no one knew his full name or the story of where he had come from. They only knew he had been a quiet, kind presence who had arrived at the end of his road and seemed, at last, to be at peace. The legend of the old man was a small one, and it faded quickly into the background noise of their hard-won lives. But other, stranger stories began to circulate, carried by travelers on the coastal paths. They spoke of a different kind of place, not on any map, a town that only appeared under certain conditions. Some said you could find it when the fog rolled in thick and silent from the sea, blurring the lines between the world of the living and something else. Others whispered it was a place you could only see from the corner of your eye, a shimmer of painted houses and flowering trees that vanished when you turned your head fully towards it. Those who claimed to have glimpsed it never spoke of ghosts or fear. They spoke of the scent of peaches on a winter breeze, or the sound of children's laughter echoing from an empty street. They said that if you were lost, truly and completely lost, you might find yourself on a road you had never seen before, a road lined with old-fashioned lampposts that glowed with a soft, golden light. And at the end of that road, you would find a library, and inside, a little girl who would offer you a book, or a flower, or a single piece of fruit. No one ever stayed. It was not a place for the living to remain, but those who visited, even for a moment, came back changed. They came back with a little more hope, a little more strength. They carried with them a quiet certainty that the world was not just a collection of ruins, that there were still pockets of wonder tucked away in its broken seams, guarded by something that had loved it enough to save its echo. And on some nights, when the wind was right, the people in the seaside village could smell a fragrance that did not belong to the ocean air. It was the smell of rich, dark earth and ripening fruit, a promise that even in the deepest silence, something was always growing. The village elder, a woman named Alara with hands as weathered as driftwood, was the one who noticed the sapling. It grew from the exact spot where the old man had died, a place they had left undisturbed out of respect. It was not a tree any of them recognized. Its leaves were a vibrant, impossible green, and its slender branches seemed to hold the light of the sun even on the cloudiest days. Within a year, it bore a single piece of fruit, a perfect, blushing peach that glowed with a soft, internal light. No one dared to pick it. It became a local talisman, a quiet mystery. They built a simple bench beneath its branches, and it became a place for quiet contemplation, for sharing secrets and soothing sorrows. The air around it was always clean and carried the faint, sweet scent of its blossom. One afternoon, a young woman from the village, burdened by a grief she could not name, sat on the bench and wept silent tears for a future she feared was lost. As a tear fell onto the root of the tree, the single peach above her loosened its stem and dropped gently into her lap. It was warm, like a living thing. Startled, she held it, and as her fingers closed around it, a profound calm washed over her. The sharp edges of her pain were smoothed away, not forgotten, but integrated, like a stone worn smooth by the sea. She did not eat the fruit. Instead, she felt a sudden, clear impulse to travel north, to a place she had heard was suffering from a blight that killed both crops and spirit. She took the peach with her, carrying it in a padded pouch. When she reached the struggling settlement, she found a community on the brink of collapse, their fields gray and barren, their faces etched with defeat. Without a word of explanation, she walked to the center of their field and dug a small hole with her hands. She placed the glowing peach within it and covered it with the blighted soil. The people watched, too exhausted to protest. The next morning, a green shoot had pushed through the earth. Within a week, it was a sapling, identical to the one by the sea. A month later, the blight around it had receded, and the land began to heal. The girl from the seaside village did not stay. She had learned the pattern, understood the purpose. She was a new gardener, a new herald. She began her own journey, carrying not a physical fruit, but the story of one, and the knowledge that some forms of life are so potent they can be passed on as an idea, a memory that takes root in the soul. And in the town that was not on any map, in the silent, snow-globe perfection of the library, Anna smiled. She was not just preserving the past anymore. She was seeding the future. Brent's long walk had been the first stitch in a tapestry, mending the world not with grand gestures, but with small, persistent acts of love, each one echoing back to her, strengthening the peace she held. The border of her town was no longer just a boundary. It was a source. The story of the girl from the seaside village and the peach tree she planted in the north was a quiet one, but it traveled. It did not travel on the loud, frantic channels of crisis, but on the slow, deep currents of need and whispered hope. People began to speak of the gardeners, not as a formal group, but as a lineage. They were solitary figures, usually arriving in a place at its lowest ebb, carrying with them a sense of impossible calm. They never stayed long, and they never performed great miracles. They simply left something behind that changed the soil, both of the land and of the heart. In a dusty settlement where the water had turned bitter, a gardener showed them how to layer sand and charcoal in a barrel to make a filter. The water that came through was not only clean, but seemed to carry a faint, refreshing coolness that lingered on the tongue. In a place torn by internal strife, a gardener sat with the elders and told them a simple parable about a tree that could only bear fruit when its branches learned to grow together, not against one another. The story did not solve their problems, but it gave them a new language with which to argue, a framework for peace they had forgotten they possessed. These gardeners rarely met one another, paths were their own, but they shared a common understanding, a recognition that they were part of a pattern they could not fully see. They were tending to a network of light, each point a place where a seed of Anna's peace had taken root. The original town, the library at its center, became less a place and more of a rumor of origin, a foundational myth for a new kind of world. Back in the seaside village, the tree on the bluff grew strong. It never grew tall and imposing, but its branches spread wide and low, offering shade and comfort. Every few years, it would bear a single, luminous peach. No one ever decided who would receive it. The fruit would simply fall, always into the hands of someone at a moment of profound transition or despair. A young man about to set out on a journey to find medicine for his sick mother. An old woman who had lost her entire family and saw no reason to go on. The peach chose its next gardener, and the cycle repeated. One evening, a young boy from the village, the grandson of the woman who had sat on the bench years before, was climbing the tree. He was not supposed to, but the branches were so inviting. As he reached for a high limb, his foot slipped. He did not fall far, and he was not badly hurt, but as he scrambled to his feet, his hand brushed against the trunk. A small, sharp splinter from the bark embedded itself deep in his palm. His mother pulled it out, cleaned the wound, and thought nothing more of it. But the boy dreamed that night. He dreamed of a library, of endless shelves of books that hummed with silent stories. He dreamed of a little girl with old, kind eyes who showed him a picture of a man with a kind face. An old man he somehow knew was named Brent. When he woke, the small cut on his hand had healed completely, leaving behind only a tiny, smooth mark that resembled a peach pit. He knew, with a certainty that children sometimes have, that the tree had given him something more than a splinter. It had given him a memory that was not his own. He did not become a gardener who walked the roads. His garden was the village itself. He became its best storyteller, its wisest mediator. He could always find the right words to soothe a conflict or mend a friendship. He had absorbed the history of the peace he guarded, and so the world mended, not in a great, roaring reformation, but in a slow, green unfolding. It was a world with scars, a world that remembered its pain, but it was no longer a world without hope. The darkness was still there at the edges, but it was now counterbalanced by these pockets of resilient, stubborn light. And in the heart of it all, in a place that existed between a memory and a prayer, a little girl continued her silent vigil, forever reading, forever guarding, forever sharing the fruit of a kindness that had, against all odds, outlasted the end of everything